I'll declare it open. First item is apologies. We have Councillor O'Leary for partial, leaving early. Should we have Councillor Bunty for lateness?
No, I'm on here now.
Oh, you're on. Oh, I was hoping not to have you for the start. We could have got through it quicker. Thank you.
I'm here for the hard questions, Dave.
Okay, very good. Ryan's here, so he's not an apology anymore. Well done. Māngai Tua away for part of the meeting and will be attending the last part in person. And Māngai Whetu is a full apology. So is there any others, Jeff?
Sorry, Dave. Yeah, look, I will probably have to leave before, but heartened that will be well done by then, I imagine.
Okay. If it's not finished by then, I'm in trouble too. Sarah, I was wondering if you wanted to sit down the end, perhaps. It'd be easier for all of us and you, possibly, if you're within the circle, if you like. Okay, councillors, I'll move that those apologies be received. Seconded by Councillor Wilson. Those in favour, against, carried. Thanks. Confirmation of the agenda. You have the run sheet, hopefully. Moved by... you're moving? No. Okay. Well, just wait for the confirmation to be moved and seconded. Moved by Councillor Wilson. I'll second that. Just noting that we may be slotting in a presenter at some stage later today. If we do, we'll advise you beforehand. We're not sure whether we're going to need to do that yet, which is why it's not written down here. Councillor Gallagher on the... this is the agenda?
Yes, it's just in the absence of a chair's report.
What?
No, this is confirmation of the agenda.
Okay.
You can...
Well, yes, I just want to see, I have an item that I want to, which I normally would have raised via your report, but I'm happy to give note to do it through the GM, if that's allowable.
Well, if it relates to one of the items on the GM's report in any way, if you can make it relate...
Is there any mention of the Community Lands Trust and progress there?
Okay, you discuss that with the General Manager in the break, because that'll be before we come to that report.
Yeah, I'm open how the information.
Well, we're not going to add a late item to the agenda.
No, certainly. I'll be happy to do that, just so that he can advise the appropriate process. I'm sure there is progress being made, but just want an update.
So I'm not having any discussion on it now.
No, that's fine. You're a lovely chair.
Yep, right. And I'll be even lovelier if you don't be quiet. Councillors, we've moved and seconded the confirmation of the agenda. Those in favour, against, that's carried. Any declarations of interest that haven't already been made in any other way? If not, we'll move to the public forum. We have one public forum presenter, which is Roger Stratford. Roger, you're on the screen, I think. I just saw your name pop up there. There you are. Morena, Roger. You've got 3 minutes. You're speaking to item 10, the Hamilton Urban Growth Strategy Review. So the floor is yours. Thanks very much.
Good morning, Chair and fellow councillors. It's wonderful to see you here in this forum. I wanted to just point out that I think it's really important to reconnect with the rest of New Zealand and with the rest of the world, particularly in regards to its housing. In terms of its principles, the principles outlined, such as cultural heritage, is a very complex issue, and it could get in the way, could get very messy and interrupt the flow of reconnecting. I hope that due care is taken, and also in terms of climate change, I think it's a bit ambitious for the city to overcommit itself. This is a role of central government and the outside agencies. We just need to get this city up and running, so we need to concentrate on getting up much more houses to accommodate the growing population expected in the next 50 to 75 years. Thanks very much. That's all I have to say. I wonder if I have any questions.
Yeah, I'll check. Any questions from the floor or from Zoom land? I don't see any. Thanks very much, Roger. The item number 10, I've predicted to someone else that it'll be after the morning tea break. I'll probably be wrong, but that's the best guess at the moment if you wanted to listen to it. Thank you. Thanks. Okay, councillors, we're moving straight on to the item 5, which is the confirmation of the Strategic Growth Committee minutes of 19th of October this year. So I'm going to move they be accepted as a true and correct record, and seconded by Councillor Ryan.
Can I just note,
Yep.
page 8, my name is spelled incorrectly at the bottom of the page, if staff can correct that.
Yep. We'll take that as, I'll add as a true and correct record, including amendments made during the meeting, something like wording like that. Any other queries or comments? If not, I'll put that recommendation. Those in favour, raise their hands. Against, that's carried. Thanks very much. Okay, councillors, we're on to the item DC's Development Contributions, State Integrated Schools. That's on page 12. That's item 6. And I think, Greg, are you present on Zoom land? We do have the possibility of having staff present here if they want, to make a presentation.
That's correct. I'm hoping that Greg might be walking through the door, but
okay.
I'm just trying to. I know that Leah is online. I think, Leah, are you there?
Ryan, did you?
I've got a proposed motion.
Yeah, I was going to come to you. I was going to announce that and come to you early in the piece, but I'd rather wait until Greg comes, if that's all right.
I'm sure I saw Leah Pavitt online.
Leah, are you online? Look, we'll just tie hold for a couple of minutes at the most.
Apologies, I can just wander down the corridor and check and see. They know it's on. Something's gone wrong there.
Our early warning system.
Something's failed. Be right back.
Morning, Paula. Right. You've got to sit up the end here. So it's one of those couple of years, just so we can see you more easily. No, Greg?
Yes. I've forgotten my glasses.
No, I thought you knew it off by heart.
Apologies, just.
Dave, am I sitting now being Greg? You're good.
Staff can appear up here. We can probably fit a couple in up there. If you're going to be part of the presentation, we'll grab another chair and put it there. I think that one at each end of that little table. Have you got them now, Greg?
2 years ago, I wouldn't have met it.
And I think if you want to take your masks off, up to you. You can. Once in the meeting, you're in work. Greg, when you're ready,
Thank you.
we'll get the floor is yours to present straight on to item 6 there. And then, sorry, councillors, just before you do, there's a staff recommendation here. The Deputy Chair of the committee, supported by myself, are putting up an alternative. It'll be open to the floor to move the staff recommendation if anyone wishes as well, and we'll give plenty of time for discussion about how, what the difference is straight after Greg's presentation. If that's okay. Greg, the floor is yours, thanks.
Sure, is that mic on?
Yep.
Good morning, elected members. This item is a development contributions item relating to state integrated schools and remissions. I'm going to take the report as read. It's reasonably dense, and I think it's probably better just to take it as read and move to questions, and noting the Chair's comment there around the options available in the report.
So, councillors, that refers to option 2, I believe, which is what Ryan's proposing essentially, which is on page 13, 7.2. The staff recommendation is option 1, just above that. Greg, I'm just wondering whether you do want to just explain the difference between options 1 and 2 from the way you're seeing it before we go into reading that out. And have you given that to staff, Ryan? Greg, do you?
Yeah, sure. So in thinking about how, if the council wishes to introduce a remission into its policy for state integrated schools, staff have considered what options it has. So it's not an exhaustive list, but these are the 4 options we think that are make the most sense. So the first option, which is recommended, is to essentially align any remission to represent the public component, effectively, of the development. So in this case, there's an extended chapel and classrooms and a gymnasium and some other facilities. So this would take the part of the development, which is the gymnasium that's available for public use, and it would use that to underpin a remission. The second option is to look less at the nature or the components of any development in a state integrated school and have a fixed remission. So you would have, I'm assuming, a percentage remission that the council wishes to assign, and that would have the benefit of being simpler, but it would also move a step away from using the community access element as the underpinning feature of the remission. And obviously, DCs are based on causation and benefits, and if the benefits of a new classroom are obviously largely confined to the school, whereas a gym that's like the Peak, which has the access of the public, is more of a community benefit, and that's why essentially we recommended option 1. Councillor Ryan's, I think, referring to option 2 as something he's wanting to introduce here as an option. And I'll just quickly run through the other 2 options. So option 3 is status quo. State integrated schools are treated as commercial developments. They place new demand on the network, and they're treated as any other commercial development. And so that's just status quo. And then option 4, this is really to round it out. Oh, sorry.
State integrated schools are the same as commercial, but they're not. They don't have to pay any DCs.
No, they do. They do, under current policy.
State schools don't, yeah.
State integrated here.
Yeah, but you said state schools do.
Oh, sorry, state integrated schools
Sorry.
are treated are in the same category in the DC policy as commercial development.
Yes,
so,
yes, yeah.
Yep, and then state schools, which is just your public school, they have an exemption under the Local Government Act. Not so much our DC policy, but just by law you can't charge them DCs. So status quo is that state integrated schools pay DCs per the policy as a commercial development. And the 4th option rounds it out effectively, and just sets the option that council can provide a one-off remission by means of a resolution. And I think that is an option, but it also runs up against the problem of treating all like developments equally and through a policy rather than one-off decisions. So So that effectively rounds out that position.
You know, thanks for explaining them and thanks for going through. They're the main thrusts of it. You can have nuances and combinations, but you get the gist of the different options and the what's behind them. Now I'm going to go to questions. Short. Just let me finish explaining, please. I'm going to go to questions, then I'm going to go to Ryan to explain, just explain, not argue for us thing. Then I'm going to ask, and I'll ask you next to move, and if you have a seconder, etc. But then we'll do questions first, of the questions of clarification of any of the options, including the staff recommendation, or any of the other options. So I don't, hang on, sorry, it's Ryan, have you got questions or?
Not at this stage, no.
Okay, so Rob, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Questions here. The paper talks about the remission being available to state integrated schools only. And my understanding and recollection is that integrated schools were originally private schools which have been over time have been integrated into the state integrated school system. Why are we excluding private schools? Why do we exclude kindergartens, early childhood centres? I presume we don't exclude private-public partnerships where a developer owns the school and then leases it to the Ministry of Education. I'm not sure on that point, but...
Well, Te Ao Marama is an example.
I'm not sure whether we collected DCs off Te Ao Marama. I know there was some discussion about it. Why are we just focusing here on state integrated schools and not educational centres per se? Because they do deliver exactly the same outcomes as state schools do.
So you're right, there's those that you named and there's all the other commercial developments, hospitals, offices, as well as all those educational facilities. The short answer is because we were asked to address state integrated schools specifically, so that's the short answer.
Just to follow up on that, if I may, Rob, state integrated schools are defined in some way under the Education Act or something, as opposed to
there's an Integration Act that defines them.
I can help this one.
But
That's
Lachlan
correct.
will probably know more.
The short point is this: the reason why we're having this discussion is because there is a provision in the Local Government Act which says that the Crown is exempt from the requirements to pay DCs. What constitutes the Crown depends upon the sector that the Crown is operating within, and it'll depend upon the piece of legislation that governs that particular sector. So for the education sector, obviously it's the Education Act, and there are other sectors where there are other acts which define what the Crown is. In the education sector, the Crown is purely state schools only. Any time that concept of a state school is then watered down into something like an integrated school or a public-private partnership, it loses the Crown characteristic and it is basically treated like any other development in the city. So that's the starting point, and that's really the reason why this paper obviously came to the committee, was because there was a question being raised around the fairness or the equality in the treatment of various entities within that sector. State schools were getting an exemption, state integrated schools weren't, other educational facilities weren't getting an exemption, and there was a question of, well, why are we not treating like for like? And really this paper is about saying, well, if we're interested, or if the council is interested in treating other education institutions like the Crown, what's the policy framework that we should wrap around it? What the staff recommendation is doing is saying, well, if you want a state integrated school to gain the same benefits that the Crown schools currently do, let's look at some of the public facilities that can create benefits back to the broader community, and let's create some policy around how that could create an exemption. That's what option 1 is doing. Option 2 is saying, no, let's not look at what facilities might be on offer. Let's just stick with, do you qualify? If you do, you get the same exemptions that the Crown does.
So option 2 probably does run the risk of opening up that exemption beyond state integrated schools, in the sense that idea of a partial exemption for assets at a state integrated school that might become semi-community assets will not be the sole focus, that we will give an exemption across the board to a brand new state integrated school in the same way that a state school gets.
Rob,
exempt.
just point you to the wording in the two options under 7. They both have the words undertaken by state integrated schools specifically in there. They both have the same qualification.
Yeah, no, but I'm just suggesting that if we move away from the partial exemption, which is the staff recommendation, to Ryan's one of a full exemption, do we run the risk of opening this policy up to kindergartens, to private schools and so forth? In the sense of saying that they're providing exactly the same benefits to the community that simply have a different ownership structure.
I think maybe I just need to make that clarification between the options. So all of the options relate only to state integrated schools, but the council can choose whichever things it wants to, hospitals, commercial buildings, whatever. So that's simply a decision that the council can make. The distinction between option 1 and option 2 is that option 1 says you're only going to get a DC remission to the extent that you're providing clear public benefit through an open access to the community. The second option says, regardless of what your development is on a state integrated school, you'll get the remission across all the buildings. So it just takes away that distinction between a gym, for example, and the classrooms, which so then is just providing a state integrated school with a remission across any development that it does. So that's the distinction. Okay. In terms of, because I understand what you're saying, are we saying that under option 2, a state integrated school gets 100% remission like a state school would? So that's not what the recommendation says. Look, the council could do that. If the council decides that it wants to give 100% remission to state integrated schools, as would a state school get, then again, that's a different council, that's an amendment, I guess, or a different decision. This decision is saying option 1, community-related facilities in the development. Option 2 says any development on the state school grounds. And you could choose, you can justify and select what percentage that is from 0 to 100.
Just a point of clarification needed here on that last point. Is the percentage you're proposing 50-50, Ryan?
Yeah, or to mirror the level of integration, whatever that might be. That's perhaps not as clear in that option.
Okay, we'll come to, so it's not a full, that's the point I wanted to clarify. It's not a full remission that's being proposed. Okay, Rob, sorry.
I'll just reserve that question because I thought you're either integrated or you're not. Yeah. And if you're integrated, then you meet all the requirements of the integration agreements.
Yeah, can I just make a comment on that point, because it's that question of what are the levels of integration, and I think Councillor Pascoe's quite right. You're either integrated or you're not, but the model will vary from school to school. But the typical model for these state integrated schools is that the land and buildings are actually owned by the private, what was the private school, and the integration comes in the form of the funding to operate the school.
The capitation sort of funding.
Yeah, there's some there's funding in terms of the operation of the educational function of the school, staff and so on, but there's also funding which can go towards some maintenance of the school, but not CapEx. But the fundamental point about the state integration schools is that typically the land and buildings started off and remain owned by the private side of the partnership.
Thank you.
Dave, I was just wondering if the same request as you had the other day, we can hear most people on Zoom, and it's just Ryan's a wee bit faint. It's quite important to hear this one.
Yep, good point. Thanks for reminding. Councillors in the room here, can all of you speak reasonably loudly into your mic when you speak and as close as you can, because it was really hard on Zoom the other day to hear.
Thank you. Second question is slightly off point because I'm still confused about the rights that the Crown has in seeking an exemption to DCs. And I've read and reread your notes there, and I'm still confused. Is it possible that the minister in charge of Kangora or Minister of Health or whoever, is it possible that they can require councils to remit DCs on any developments that they undertake on Crown land, in the same way that the schools have, state schools have that full exemption?
Lachlan, question.
Well, the short answer is yes. I mean, the minister of any Crown organisation can point to the provision in the Local Government Act which gives them a free pass. So we're not necessarily talking about a remission or an exemption. They just simply aren't subject to the DC regime. It's a complete carve-out for the Crown.
Okay, so that is a risk for council, that they could build a new hospital in Hamilton North and seek full remission using that exemption that they've got under the Local Government Act.
Yes, and that's a risk that has existed before this paper was presented.
Okay.
So we're starting to stray a bit beyond
no,
the
I said I was slightly off point, but that was covered in the paper, and I just wanted to get that clarity that that is potentially a significant risk to us, isn't it? That a government might, or the minister might seek that exemption.
Yes, that's correct. Any Crown agency, if they meet the definition of the Crown and they develop within Hamilton City, or in fact any other city in the country, would be exempt from the DC regime.
Yeah, okay. And one last question, Chair, and thanks for indulging me in this. As I understand it, most of the state integrated schools in Hamilton, before the Hamilton Christian School, are owned either by the Anglican Church, the Baptist or Roman Catholic churches, and they have built buildings which have been subject to the DC regime. Have they, in any of the recent incidences, any of the recent bills, have they sought an exemption or partial exemption from DCs for buildings?
Yeah, so you're right about them being charged DC. So paragraph 41 in the report just gives examples of private schools and state integrated schools that have paid DCs, and it shows the state schools that haven't. Who challenges or who appeals to the Crown exemption? The university did. Schools, the state integrated position is pretty clear cut in terms of the legislation. We have legal advice. The criteria is the Crown. A state integrated school isn't the Crown, so we haven't had them directly challenge us. They have said, eligible? Should we receive it? Yeah, are we eligible? And so in the university's case, we took advice from Lachlan and his team about that, but that's a bridge that we had crossed in the past, so that was checking it off. So the short answer is no one except state schools or fire stations or whatnot have received the benefit of that Crown exemption.
Okay, would we be obliged now, if we passed one of these two options today, for these schools who have recently put buildings up that would be eligible for whichever decision we follow today, to make an application for that remission, or is that time period now lost?
Well, when the council makes changes to its DC policies, they become effective, typically 1 July of the LTP or annual plan years, because that's when we do it. So, that's when the provision starts. I don't recall any retrospective provisions, except maybe 6 or 7 years ago there was a community infrastructure one that came about because of a legislation change. So the short answer is, in the normal practice, the policy provisions don't act retrospectively, but it's not to say they couldn't. It just comes with, with certain challenges potentially.
They would have to be put in the resolution, I would imagine, to enact it, and it's not currently in there, Rob.
Okay, no, that's answered my question. Thank you. Thank you,
Thanks.
Chair.
I'd like to move on to Sarah, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Greg, I was just wondering.
Can you speak into the mic?
Sorry.
Yep.
Have any other councils taken an approach like this with state integrated schools?
Not directly that I'm aware of. Different councils have some sort of what I consider kind of ad hoc or specific remissions. Wellington, I think, has a like an environmental solutions related remission. Off the top of my head, I don't know of any council that explicitly carves out, like say, state integrated schools or other institutions, but that's off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of, I guess it's pretty hard to put a figure on it, but say over the next 5 to 10 years, like if we went with option 2 and hypothetically speaking there was a 50% remission, then what might that potentially cost in terms of a reduced recovery of DCs?
Yeah, it is a good question, and it's also, of course, it's hard to project, things in a narrow area. So if the council went with that option, we would need to do a investigation and make some projections on that and bring them back. But I guess one example is for the Hamilton Christian School, their stage 1 classroom was 504,000 DCs. So if you had the provision, then you would be remitting 252,000 on that classroom. So it would be some multiplier of that probably that you'd estimate over the 10 years. So I mean, if it was one of those a year, that'd be $2.5 million. But that's obviously just an example. We'd need to do some maths.
Okay, thank you. And with last question was just with option 1, do you think that it would potentially encourage schools when they're doing developments to partner with us?
I think it would provide an incentive.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Martin, thank you.
I'm not sure if you can answer this specific question, and it may be part of the debate, and I realise the question I'm about to ask might be regarded as philosophical. Not all integrated schools seem to be created equal. So obviously
what's the question, Martin?
Well, the state schools
try
around
and
fees.
couch it as a question, not as a speech.
Well, okay. The question I have is fees. Give us the fee range. So what is the most expensive fees for an state integrated school, given that all the other stuff is fronted up by the taxpayer, apart from land and buildings, versus the cheapest, all right? So this is about access. And the context of the question is state schools, equal access, under legislation, etc., etc. There is a fee which may block certain classes of people attending schools, okay? Do we have a sense of that? Because as I understand it, there is a range.
My best definition or understanding, so in paragraph 37, there's some guideline definitions. So my policy program manager, Tiki Mossop, worked for the Ministry of Education, so she's got a pretty good understanding and that's just the sort of what is a state integrated school as compared to a private school. In terms of fee structures, no, I don't know that, but I agree with you. I'm sure there is a range. Because I sense where you're going with that is that if you did a remission for state integrated schools across the entire, all development there, that you would want to, could you calibrate it in some way to recognise the different, fee structures?
Well, I think it is through.
Well, no, is that what you're asking?
Well, yes. First of all, it would be interesting for this council, for good decision making, to actually know what those fee structures are, because I know.
Martin, that's not in the resolution. If you want to add that at some stage, that could be a nuance that's added in.
with respect, it's a nuance that I think we should be aware of.
Well,
because obviously, there's you give
debate, Martin, you really are stretching the difference between debate and questioning.
All right. Can you confirm that there is a significant range between the Diocesan School for Girls and Sacred Heart College as two examples?
I can't confirm that sitting here, but I will go away and investigate that, and if it's public information, I can bring that back.
Yes, could we do that?
I can.
Sorry, just before you answer that, I'm happy to give you a go. Like remind councillors, like Councillor Martin, that we have already had one go in here and we sent staff away with a whole lot of issues we wanted them to investigate. That was the time to start asking this sort of question. This is the report back as a result of all the points we raised earlier. Lachlan, just one go at it, one short go.
$7,000 is the range between those two schools.
So what would roughly be Sacred Heart?
I think, well, I can tell you, it's less than 1,000.
Less than 1,000. Good for working class families.
No, Martin, you'll be removed from the question list if you don't stop that.
What is the DIO? Sorry, that's helpful.
And DIO is about
$8,000 per year. Thank you.
Okay, next questioner is Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, it's very hard to follow, Councillor Martin.
It's very hard to follow at all times.
Mr. Chair, so my question, Greg, is it true to say that development contributions are a means by which we as a council try to allocate true costs associated with the development activity? And if we choose special ones to exempt, does that not transfer the financial burden to the remaining entities that we place DCs at the feet of?
Yeah, and the short answer is yes. It's a binary game, basically, developers or ratepayers. And so, as you said, we distribute the costs of growth infrastructure to the beneficiaries and those that cause it. So yes, if you make a decision that takes you away from that central point, then you're effectively transferring some liability to the ratepayer that would have otherwise been a developer.
To the ratepayer or other developer in the same sector, if you like. Some balance between that.
Well, no, because we need to seal that off, because we can only charge X under the Act, so you can't say, well, you're going to get a discount, so we'll charge the other guys more, so that's why you have that transfer to the ratepayer. Yeah.
Thanks, Ewan. I was just seeking a clarification of that.
Yeah, so in simple terms, if we were to give this to integrated state schools, which are predominantly, as Councillor Pascoe has illustrated, are owned by churches, the churches are exempt and the ratepayer picks up the bill.
So when you say the churches are exempt,
you mean the schools?
Correct.
The school?
Correct.
Yeah, because essentially the school develops, puts transport trips on the road and uses water. Development would normally pay for that, but when you remit it, you say, well, you won't pay for it, so the person who does is what we generally refer to as the ratepayer, yeah.
Final question. Are any state schools, are all state schools not for profit? Sorry, are all state integrated schools not for profit?
I don't know. Maybe someone can help me out. Lachlan, my schools expert.
I don't know whether there is a profit imperative or not. I mean, I certainly know that through the state school system and the integrated system, there's the opportunity for state integrated schools to not only get the funding from the education sector, but also to have separate charges which are derived or generate a revenue from families that are participating in the school. Now, whether that generates profit or whether it's required to be ploughed back into the school in terms of improved services and so on, I don't know. I suspect there is some sort of prohibition on profit in the long term. I mean, I can come back and give you an answer on that point.
So, and that would be sort of an operating profit as opposed to a building your asset one, which has been shown that they do generate that.
Yes, and that's the point. So if you're talking about pure dividends, for example, I suspect there is a prohibition on some kind of dividend. But if there is a dividend or there is a net profit which is ploughed back into the school, the improved buildings or whatever, I suspect there's a lot of that occurring.
And so just clarification on that, there is no uncertainty that a state integrated school has the ability to gain financially from both land and from buildings that they own.
That's great.
And by providing them any rebate on a DC that is specifically specifically for the purpose of increasing the footprint of building, is that not somewhat, is that correct? So in theory, the ratepayer is subsidising the DCs on the one area that an integrated state school is allowed to gain profit.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, yes, the council would be, the ratepayer would be subsidising the school, but the carve-out that we suggested to come up in the remission is the bit that relates to community benefit. So then you could say, well, the ratepayer has access to the building, but in terms of the school buildings and stuff, yeah, indirectly, yes, I'd say there's a subsidisation.
That wouldn't be the case for the Council Ryan's option 2.
For the elements of the school that were essentially just school facilities. I mean, I can't walk into the classroom, obviously, but if I can walk into the gym and shoot hoops, then that's good for me as a citizen.
Okay, thank you.
Just to clarify that last point, which could be a bit of unfairness between the two, you couldn't walk into Rotuna High School classroom either, could you?
That's right.
Yeah, so it doesn't really matter whether it's integrated or state. There's only certain facilities that you can hire.
Yeah, that's right. No, you did right. I was just trying to draw the distinction, but yeah.
Mr. Chair, unlike a state school, an integrated state school could at some stage sell the building, the classroom, and gain financial return that has been subsidised.
Ask them as a question.
Yeah, sorry. That has been, is it true to say that? Unlike a state school, an integrated school, if under option 2, could at a subsequent time sell the building that they qualified for a DC exemption on and profit from that.
I'll just bring in my school's expert.
Expert in the education sector. I would say that would have to be subject to the integration agreement on a school-by-school basis, but theoretically correct.
Thank you.
So just to follow that question, is it true that the Ministry of Education could also sell a school building or land, such as Richmond Park School, that had been subject to no DCs?
I would say yes.
Mm. So can happen under some circumstances.
Would go back to the state. In that case, the profit would go back to the state.
But not to the community either. In neither case does it go back to the community, is the point there. I've got Mark, Councillor Mark 1.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Dave. This is a really interesting set of questions. Just on that, selling back to the community, if a state school is selling back to the community, it has to go to, the option has to go to EB first, then potentially to the community way before it goes to private sale. So there's quite a difference, am I right, Lachlan?
There is, yep.
Yeah, okay, cool. Can it, just in very, very simple terms, just for context, can you just give me a very quick reminder of what are DCs for? What do they pay for?
Sure. They are a cost recovery mechanism that recovers part of the cost of growth infrastructure. So it's infrastructure the council puts in to take care of new demand. and they're based on the benefit which the community receives, or the growth community receives from the new infrastructure, and who caused it. That's essentially what they are.
So it pays for pipes and roads and everything that people are going to use in that space in advance.
Yeah, but it also, I mean, it actually predominantly pays for wastewater treatment plant upgrades, ring roads, reservoirs, and also the more localised infrastructure that council puts in, say, in Rotorua itself. So, yeah, it pays for both, but we shouldn't forget that it broadly pays for big network infrastructure across the city.
Yeah, got it. Right. So which would be the demands on our infrastructure from a classroom per se wouldn't be a lot different from those of a gym or something that has community use. Is that right?
No, and from the DC policy perspective, or an office, or a church, etc. Yeah, so they're broad categories. That's right.
Cool. If we go through with any of these options, are we going to be at risk of any retrospective claims from people who have paid DCs recently?
Bunty, that question's already been asked by Councillor Robb, exactly that, and was answered earlier.
Sorry, what was the answer?
The answer was not normally, but Greg can recall one occasion about 7 years ago when it happened on a specific instance.
Okay.
And so maybe just to, you're right, just to clarify, if the council says this comes into effect on 1 July, then that's when it comes into effect. You say, hey, what about me? I was a month before. Well, it starts on 1 July. So you won't run into that problem directly.
So we're hard and fast on that. Okay, cool. Yeah, good. And look, there's double negatives on page 15. There's double negatives flying all over the place. I got myself quite confused. With regards to Section 8 of the LGA and exemptions.
What number? What paragraph?
Page 15.
Yeah, paragraph.
Paragraph 23.
Thanks.
And it's in correlation to 18 and 19. Developments that would generally not be exempt. So being exempt from, you're saying from DCs, is that right?
So it means these developments would pay DCs.
They would pay, so if we are to build a community hall, for example, in Fairfield and Endley, we'll be paying ourselves DCs.
Well, actually, you've got if the council itself does the construction, it won't, because you've got a clause in the policy that says, yeah, we don't pay DCs to ourselves, but if a community hall is built, yeah, it will be liable for DCs, unless we physically build it.
And universities in the same kettle.
That's right.
Wow. Okay, no, that I understand that. Thank you. No, just sort of making sense of it all. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark. I have Councillor Hamilton, and Councillor Gallagher is banished at the moment because he is trying to formulate questions as opposed to speeches.
Thanks. Just trying to work through our motion. Well, I just want to clarify because we're asking questions on, and I want to know that we're asking questions relative to what's been proposed.
Oh, the questions are on the report, but so I want to make sure that councillors Mangai were aware of the context, which is the two motions,
Okay.
the motion and the amendment.
I'll ask a question for Lachlan or Greg. With regard to options 1 and 2, so this all came about largely because of the development that we're doing with Hamilton Christian School and the community benefits. So obviously it was nonsensical to be paying DCs, you know, to the community. But option 2 would also encompass option 1 anyway, wouldn't it?
That's right.
Give us the proviso to build that in. Yep. Okay, thank you.
Yep. Now, Councillor Gallagher, do you have an actual question?
I just need to, just for example, just clarify community halls. They at the moment pay a DC. So, for example, the settlement centre development, they would pay DCs with a clear community benefit. But under the proposed resolution, a Dio school wouldn't pay a DC at $8,000 a year.
Well, correct. What if the resolution?
Yeah.
If the council decided that it wanted to give a full remission of state integrated schools.
So the Dio hall would be no DCs. The settlement centre in Boundary Road would be subject to DCs. Thank you.
Can we check that? Because
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
it's
sorry,
genuine.
maybe I didn't hear
It's a council
correctly.
I think to
originally.
clarify, councillor, you said Dio Hall, no DCs.
Well, under the new proposal,
yeah, just
Yeah.
I think we just need to clarify, there are there's option one and option two.
Sure.
Option one, the DCs for a state integrated school, such as Dio, would be reduced to the extent that there was public access to those particular, or CUNY benefit to those particular access facilities. Under option two, it would be potentially 50%, but it's not zero DCs.
so just for example, the Dio School Principal's House converting to an office under this proposal, if the proposal that's being moved, there'll be no DCs for that particular piece of work, is that right?
So if it's on the grounds of a state integrated school, then it's currently, it just pays DC.
Yeah.
So if you're going to turn residential into a commercial, you'll pay whatever DC that is.
Yeah.
If the council, you know, on 1 June of this year, as a consequence of all of this discussion, ends up making a resolution to remit state integrated school development, then it will pay no DCs, yeah. There's kind of a counterfactual for right
And
now.
the
Yeah.
settlement centre and Boundary Road, they will still pay DCs?
This-
Their building program?
Who built it? Who built it?
If it was not built by the council, they would pay DCs, yes. Yeah.
Right, okay, thank you.
okay. I think there needs to be a little bit of clarification about that particular example, but the general point is
Yeah,
correct.
and that's a good point, because I don't know that, but I'm just working on the basis that it's a community hall, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So we have Councillor Kesh.
Thank you. Just looking at the staff recommendation, and then I'm looking at point 47.
Point what, sorry?
Can you hear me?
It was just a bit muffled. You're looking at point what? 7.
So, point 47.
47.
Just other education facilities. I'm just wanting to know, why was the staff recommendation only covering state integrated schools, and not, wholly or partially funded educational facilities?
That question, Councillor Robb did ask almost the same question at the start, so just really...
Equity, like, was that addressed?
That's just because we
We're
were
not
asked
listening to you,
was
Rob.
the answer. So we were asked to consider a remission for state integrated schools, and I think that point is just fleshing out the other types of educational facilities that exist.
Yeah. And then in 48 it says that staff will expect some of those organizations to request similar treatment. Do we have a current understanding of what that might look like in terms of, do we know current projects or current projects that might come back to us going, can we get a remission, or can they apply for remissions retrospectively?
So really what this is referring to is if the council goes out with a draft DC policy and says we're looking at state integrated school remissions, just from experience I'd say you can expect any other community, or just, you can expect churches and other educational facilities to say, hey, why them and not us? That's really what that point is. In terms of the pipeline of developments coming through, again, don't have it to hand, but those sectors that come through to development often. So universities expand, preschools, there's high demand for that. So those are developments that we continue to expect to see.
And, thinking about our work that we're doing with Sport New Zealand around opening access for the public to use sports grounds and facilities outside of ours, how defined is option 1 where it says where that development provides public access and community benefit? Can that extend to a school saying you have access to our sports grounds, or that's public access, or we should have a remission on that basis? I mean, what's the boundary?
So the the recommendation isn't a recommendation in terms of that's the provision that go in the policy. Really, that's to show a type of framework that you could use. So the council then has the option of sort of how it wants to frame the, if you decided that if the council selected option 1, sort of in principle that community-related open access infrastructure, there's a formal arrangement where people can be confident they can go and use it, then we want to be able to remit that. So when you get down to the nitty-gritty of, well, how exactly are you going to do that remission, then you're in that policy drafting thing. You don't want to be too specific because you end up tying yourself up in knots quite often, but you want to be specific enough that it's understood what the requirements are. So I think you're talking about the finer end of the policy drafting, which we're not at that point yet.
Yeah, perhaps I should have sorry, Keith, just a sec. Should have reinforced that at the start. This isn't adopting the policy. This is saying this is the policy direction we want you to go away and write, staff. So it will come back for the final cut of the actual policy. And thanks for asking that question, Kesh. We needed to clarify that.
Thank you. I've just got one last question, and that's in relation to Hamilton Christian School in particular. I understand that we were discussing a partnership agreement with the school. So could this DC remission business be encapsulated in the partnership agreement without going down the policy avenue?
So that's option 4 in the report, which is, the short answer is yes, but it comes with some risks, and from a public policy perspective, providing remissions and private agreements is not probably not considered a robust way to do public policy. So I think if you have an intention to provide remissions because of say public access, then I'd recommend that you write a provision into your policy, because you will get questions from other developers as to why was this afforded to one party and not to us or others.
So sorry, then just leading on from that, if it does go through and we through the policy avenue, will the remission of, say for the gym or the court is approximately 550k, which is 50%, will that be taken into consideration as council's contribution towards that development? When we do get down to that dollar negotiation part?
So look, I'm not leading that negotiation, but I would say yes. But again, not my call, but I think it is a contribution from the council directly in relation to that development. And I should say also that even though I wouldn't recommend writing a bespoke DC remission, it would be sensible to put the remission into the agreement generally so that it's part of the package.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Thanks, Kesh. Councillors, that's the end of questions. I'm just going to, we've got the staff recommendation down here, which is the amendment, which is moved by Councillor Wilson and Mayor Paula seconding it. Ryan, we'll get your amendment up on the wall and just on the board here, and then just explain anything technical in it, like the purport.
Amendment, you mean his motion?
Sorry, yeah, not yours, sorry. Yours is here in front of us from the start, and just explain that, like the proportion and so forth, once we get that up there, and then we'll go into debate after that.
Have you seen them?
Ryan, a question of you that introduced partial remission. Do you have a proportion there?
Yeah, I mean, given it's sort of a bit of a draft policy, should we put a 50-50 in there, Greg, or would you reflect that back in terms of, well, Lachlan, you touched on how the integrations vary. Is there a way we could capture that better in the resolution?
Could I suggest, for the purpose of this debate, that we do specify 50-50 because we don't know the range where that's already come out in questioning. Lachlan had some inside info, obviously, but that wasn't the full answer, and it would introduce a sort of an unknown element to the debate.
Yeah, sure, and it'll come back anyway.
Yes.
With a bit more refinement, eh?
And we'd have ability to have access to that sort of info. 50-50 is going to be a cleaner discussion, yes or no, to it, I think.
50-50 or just 50%?
So rather than partial, 50%.
Why is SEAL different than the staff recommendation? I mean, the only thing I thought I was changing was option 1 to 2, because option 2 incorporates a lot of that stuff.
Sorry, can you explain that?
Is it still got D on the end of this?
Yeah.
As per the staff recommendation?
Can we just roll that down?
It's just your D. Yeah.
C has become,
C is what was D.
C is what was D. So if you look at the staff recommendation, the current C provides greater detail that sort of provides the thinking behind the remission. In this case, that's not required because it's just explicitly saying 50%.
So your B, Ryan, replaces B and C
Yeah,
in the staff recommendation.
Okay. But it's encompassed in there in principle? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So is that clear to everyone now? A, B and C in the motion and A, B, C and D in the amendment. Questions, not of just on the technical side. Yep, Martin?
So the motion basically, for all development undertaken, that's the critical sentence, for all development, that's the critical difference between that and
All
the amendment.
development undertaken in state integrated schools, yes.
Yeah, the other.
As opposed to just in the community benefit area.
Sure.
In the amendment.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that clear to everyone? Zoom land? Yep, no questions, thank you. Okay, we're going to move to debate. Ryan's going to open that, and then I'll ask Councillor Ewan to speak next. We're going to try and keep it to 3 minutes, please. We've had plenty of debate during the questioning.
All right, can everyone hear me all right on Zoom? I'll try and talk loud and slow. Look, I think option 1 or 2 are both a step forward. That's the bottom line, and I'm pleased to see them both on the table today. I just want to disarm my colleagues also in saying that both the motion and the amendment are coming back for refinement as we contemplate DCs next year in the annual plan process. So we're not baking for anything in today. We're just testing some things. Option 2 for me is a little bit more about equity. So schools currently don't pay any DCs. Hamilton Christian School, which we're talking about a lot today, but it's not just limited to the school, is about to embark in multi-million-dollar developments and potentially pay, I think, around $2 to $4 million in DCs. The school is building 4 new additional classrooms only because it's growing, only because it's now state integrated, and yet we're penalising them by saying you have to pay for all of that privately, even though you're catering for public students. So it's just, without overcooking it, I just think they've been trapped in this growth phase, but are penalised by an anomaly in an existing HCC policy, and I'm just really keen to explore that a bit further. All this does is create a draft for us to test out, and that's what I'm really keen to do. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Ewan, thanks.
Yeah, look, thanks, Chair Dave. This council, as other councils have done, have used DCs as a means to reduce the burden on ratepayers when funding infrastructural growth. As a council, one should never take lightly any DC remission because, as we've heard, it shifts the burden back to the ratepayer. Government has used its legislative power to say, we, the government, are exempt, and we have to accept that. What the motion, Councillor Ryan's motion would do, would, as well as the amendment, would create an additional exemption. One is across the entire development, which is Councillor Ryan's, where the staff recommendation was it would provide some remission on the area of public access and community benefit. I feel it would be easier to explain to the ratepayer of Hamilton why they're having to pick up the extra cost if the explanation was the quid pro quo, you get access, the community gets access to aspects of the development. The reality is, under the Councillor Ryan's motion, is that the state integrated school, which is in itself is able to profit from land and building, is deriving a community subsidy for a private use. And I think that's inherently unfair. It's as simple as that. So remissions should never be given lightly. If we are to give a remission, it should be for access and community benefit. It should not be to enable what would otherwise be a private entity undertaking commercial activities, being able to glean a financial benefit subsidised by the ratepayer.
Thank you, Ewan. Look, I'll speak next, and I am seconding the motion, but also agree that the amendment is a step in the right direction anyway, so I'm relaxed either way. Ewan made some very important points before. One of them is clearly about the private good versus public good element. I do point out that council has dabbled or intervened or stuck its toe into this area anyway. The CBD 50% remissions that it gives are essentially for private good as well, because we see the greater public policy outcome that derives from that. So it's not something brand new to council. It's brand new in the area of education, but not brand new in the area of this or other councils' policies. I'm a great supporter of the public education system. I can't see why there are any private or integrated schools. I don't see the need for them, personally speaking, but I recognise they're there, and there's a system that takes account of that. I think that there's a great degree of inequity at the moment. Huge institutions like the university, Wintec, Rotuna High School put enormous pressure on our infrastructure. We have all discussed that many times, and pay no development contributions towards that infrastructure at all. I think if I could change a law, it would actually go in the opposite direction of what we're doing now. I would change it so they start paying DCs the same as everyone else. Since we can't do that and it's not in our control, I would like to introduce some degree of equity in the other direction. I think to give state integrated schools complete DC remission is a step too far if you're looking at the finances and what goes back on the ratepayers. So I think the 50-50 split is a fair compromise, if you like, and that's the way I'm looking at it. I do note that selling school land and school buildings is something that both the state sector and the integrated sector can do and do on occasions, and we've had some debate in this council over the Richmond Park School and what it might be used for, and the Ministry of Education attempt to flog it off more than once after they closed it. So there's no... The lines are pretty blurred. The ground is muddy no matter which way you look at it. I do think it's important that we recognise a greater degree of equity than we currently have at the moment. That inequity is driven by a very old-fashioned, out-of-date set of government legislation. We're trying to introduce a slightly greater element of fairness here, and one way or another, I think it's important we do head in that direction. I think we probably should be looking at lobbying the government to change so that they reflect their lack of DCs being paid on the major ones as well, but that's another argument for another day. Thanks. Now I've got Councillor Rob next, and then Councillor Mark. Mark 1.
And look, without getting into the philosophical reasons behind state integrated schools, I would like to say that the state integrated schools have brought significant value and benefit to the education system in New Zealand. Initially, they bring into the system land and buildings that have been paid by a proprietor, and that particular land and buildings then saves the taxpayer from the significant costs of establishing a brand new state school. I would disagree with Councillor Wilson that this is a community subsidy for private use. And I say that with some knowledge of the Integration Act, which requires proprietors of state integrated schools to allow a certain number of students eligibility to attend those schools when they are not part of, if you like, the common group, the common religion or sector that owns the school. And perhaps to give some information back to the city solicitor, integrated schools charge an attendance due, and that attendance due is determined by the level of debt that the school has in terms of its borrowing for its buildings, and needs to be approved by the Ministry of Education. The difference between the two values that were previously exchanged in the chamber today is what's known as a voluntary parent donation. So look, I think that there is a public use here in integrated schools, and that's been proven since the Integration Act was passed back in the 1960s. And I agree with Chair Dave. We have done this remission quite freely in the CBD in recent years, and we've done it for a profitable purpose to those developers who have been incentivised by a remission in their DC to get those buildings up sooner than we thought that they might have done that. And they have been able to profit from that because they've reflected that savings in the value of the properties and the value of the buildings that they have on-sold. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Mark 1.
All right, thank you, and please forgive me if I repeat anything Bob said. I didn't understand a lot of it.
Bunty, please. That wasn't Bunty. Mark. Mark.
Interesting part of this.
Oh.
First of all, from what I can understand, DCs pay for infrastructure that puts a strain on community infrastructure by the activity it's trying to create. So where a whole group of people are coming together, they will put strain on infrastructure by that activity. And it's, I agree with Dave in that the Crown, it doesn't seem fair that the Crown doesn't buy into that or pay DCs. But I guess the presumption is that when they co-partner with us, we get that money back anyway with that infrastructure. So I presume that's the rationale behind that. But I think when this comes back, I'll be relaxed whichever one comes back, but I'd really be very, very keen to see two things. One, and that was one piece of information that our city solicitor couldn't provide, and that was where the dividends go in the integrated state schools. Because that's quite a salient point. We don't know if there's regulation to say they can't make a profit to provide to their shareholders. We don't know the extent of that. And to me, that will actually that will influence my decision in the long run, whether the profits gained by selling any buildings that are technically privately owned by integrated state schools go to shareholders, or do they go back to the institution? So we're really keen to see what the regulations are on that, and that will make a difference to my decision down the track. But what's also missing too, I think, is a little bit of even-handedness. I think if we are going to be looking at this for state integrated schools, then we need to be looking at this for private schools and all private institutions as well, or private educational institutions as well, because the outcome is our kiddies are getting educated regardless of which way it's funded. They're coming out with a very similar education. The regulations about what they're allowed to be taught is so darn tight. It's just how it's done. Private use, it's interesting, people think private schools seem to be this strange sort of pariah thing, but they're not. There are large community groups as well. You've got classrooms of kiddies together getting educated. That is a huge community group. And finally, I would end on this, private good is also public good. So they're not separated as well. So I'm really interested in seeing which way it comes back. I'll be pretty relaxed as to where this one goes.
Yeah. Just before I go to Councillor Gallagher, I would like to comment, I don't think it's good that any councillor in their speech cast aspersions at other councillors, especially that have just spoken, like you did at the start there, Bunty, against Councillor Rob. That wasn't right, and I'd ask councillors not to conduct themselves like that, please. So, Councillor Gallagher.
Sorry, Rob, if you're offended.
No, the aspersion I'd share on Councillor Rob is his background, and considerable background with the state integrated schools and the governance and advice, and I acknowledge that, and I think he's very good to give us advice. The real problem I have, and I guess you can't divorce philosophy, and I would make the point, Richmond Park's been mentioned. I'm not aware in my time with that school community, which sadly the school closed, that they were asking the residents of the Richmond Melville area for an $8,000 a year voluntary donation. And this is the crunch, in my view. Education, and in normal circumstances, I would have gone for the motion, the Ryan Hamilton motion, because I do absolutely honour the wonderful education provision given by state integrated schools throughout the city, and I've actually taught in one. My kids have attended state and independent and state integrated, so like a lot of people around this table, we've had a variety of interactions at a personal family level. What's holding me back at this point from supporting the Ryan and Dave's motion is I still have a problem and I want as to where you have a school, for example, that as I understand it from the city solicitor can charge a quote voluntary, what a lovely name, voluntary donation for up to $8,000 a year. I personally think that's in a really different category to some of our wonderful Catholic schools who only charge, say, up to $1,000 a year. And the issue is, you know, what all education should be predicated that working families should be able to get access to education, whether it's a special character education, which I honour, or through the state system. And then when it comes to DCs, I still want to ensure that, for example, if you were giving a DC remission to a school that charged a potential voluntary donation of that kind of figure that the city solicitor mentioned, that was on the actually same basis as the sort of other developments. For example, the settlement centre in Boundary Road. You know, what DCs are they having to pay? I'm not sure. So that's my reservation around the motion, and that's why I'm supporting the amendment, because the amendment clearly specifies at this point you're going for a clear, defined community good at the discretion of this council. However, as we're going to be reporting back further, and there's through the annual plan development process, I don't preclude moving eventually to the original motion, subject to some of those issues being sorted along the way. Okay?
Thank you. Oh,
thank you.
Thanks. I've got Councillor Kesh, then Jeff after that. Thanks. Kesh, please.
Thanks, Dave. I have one issue with supporting the motion, and for similar reasons of equity, because I I think that if we're looking at state integrated schools, then we should really be looking at all education facilities, whether they be partially or wholly funded by the government, and not just state integrated schools. And I'm talking about early childhood centres and kindergarten who can, look at public access and community use, and who don't know that is an option. I'm not in favour of looking at just state integrated schools, but more of having that larger conversation that encompasses all education facilities, because in my mind, they are all providing the same outcomes as state integrated schools. And I'm going to support the staff recommendation and the amendment because I'm supporting the community benefit and public access component of that, to look at that in the policy. And just as a side note, we talked about community halls and other facilities who still provide community benefit and public access, but who are still required to pay DCs, such as the settlement centre development, which is ongoing at the moment. I can see them, for example, approaching us in the same way that the Christian school has. So I'll be supporting the amendment today. Thank you.
Thanks. Jeff, please.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, look, I'm going to support the staff recommendation, the amendment.
Jeff, can you speak up a bit? Sorry, it's pretty quiet.
Sure. I'm very quietly spoken. I'm going to support the staff recommendation, the amendment put up by Councillor Wilson and Mayor Southgate, because I can see a clear rationale for why we're doing it. I'm finding it hard to understand the basis for option 2, the motion. As has been said around the table, DCs are there to recoup the cost on the network of new infrastructure from the beneficiaries of that infrastructure, rather than having the ratepayers fund it. And to me, I just can't get past this, I'm sorry, Ryan. There's a clear distinction between facilities created to be used for the public, state schools, which anyone can go to, probably at a cheaper cost, and as opposed to those for state integrated schools, which may cost significantly more to attend, and where the schools can actually dictate who goes to those schools. They have control over their role. They can adjudicate on who goes and who doesn't. And as opposed to a state school where if you're in the area, you can go as of right. And I can't get past that difference, I'm sorry. It doesn't make sense to me why we would deviate from that. I do understand and I do support DC remissions in the case where a state integrated school, an ex-private school, is creating facilities explicitly for shared use for both the school and for the community around it. I get that and I support that. I'm not sure that the example about the CBD remission works for me. I don't see that as apples and apples comparison, because we created that remission because the central city was struggling at the time and it needed a boost, and we wanted to encourage development in the central city, in my view, because we saw it as a benefit for the community, for the city, because the central city is the heart of our city, and it's to all of our benefit that it's flourishing, not a dead duck, I think, as it was once described by Gordon Chesterman years ago. And it's worked, amongst other things. So I get that, and I'm not sure that that's an argument for the motion in this case. So I guess, yeah, to me, I just can't get past that principle of if you're going to a state school, I get that. That should be eligible for remissions, but I don't believe the state integrated schools, unless they're explicitly sharing facilities, should be.
Thanks, Jeff. Sarah, please.
Thank you. I've been listening closely to the debate and I agree with many of the points made by Councillor Ryan, Councillor Dave around equity, but I also have concerns that firstly we could be opening up a larger can of worms than we might anticipate with going with option 2, with other institutions able to potentially have the same argument around providing a public good. But also, I think that there's a big benefit in, at least for now, going with option 1, where we can encourage that partnership with schools, like we have entered into with the Hamilton Christian School, where we can we can have a balance of land used or facilities used for the school, but also for the community, and maximise that community benefit. And that aligns with the work we're doing through the play strategy that Dr. Puddle is leading around actually working with schools to get them to open up their playgrounds and fields for community use. And I think there's probably, I don't want to get into arguments about private and public gain and things, because you look at the CBD Remission and clearly we are benefiting private developers there, and I think that argument can start to get murky. But I guess the other concern I have is just right now we're so financially constrained. We've got a very small gap between what's our maximum debt capacity and where we're heading to, and we have so many things that we also need to think about in terms of the benefit to the community around providing more green spaces. We enable greater density and all of these things. So I just think that for now the smaller step is a better option, but I'm open to then having that further discussion at another stage.
Thanks. Ryan, your right of reply, thanks.
Yeah, look, really simply, I think I'm glad that Rob raised the CBD Remission, and I take a different view from Deputy Mayor on that. I mean, at the end of the day, we've incentivised private development, and at the other end of the scale here, we're looking to lessen the penalty on those that are paying. And it's just not congruent. It's picking and choosing winners and losers. Martin talked about equity. I know he's a big champion of equity, so I'm surprised a little bit, but we'll see how things go there. Kesh talked about bringing back childcare facilities and all that sort of stuff. We had the opportunity to talk about the wider education sector at our last meeting, and this is what staff have brought us back today. And a lot of those kindergartens are also subsidised with 20 free hours, and it's been a massive commercial boon for early childhood providers. Sarah talked about debt capacity, but I don't think it's right to burden the parents of these students to support our debt to revenue ratio. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Okay, councillors, moving to the vote, and it'll be on the amendment first, which relates to option 1. Amendment moved by Councillor Ewan and seconded by Paula. Mayor, Paula. Yeah, okay, that's a good point. Thank you. We'll just put it up, then we'll go straight to the vote. And look, I'll do a vote by show of hands. I prefer that than everyone's on the same category there as soon as we get it up, which is also the one in diligent.
Yeah, it's the one with the changes though, isn't it? It's been, no,
there's no changes. This is the amendment.
This is straight from diligent.
Yeah,
okay,
moved by Ewan, seconded by Paula. And it's as you see it in diligent, but we'll put it up on the board as well. It's on some boards. You got the wrong screen. We got the chat screen. Okay, shh, no talking. All right, there it is. It's about as big as we can get it. Okay, those in favour of the amendment, please raise their hands, including in Zoom land. and we'll wait for you guys to count. Tell me when you're ready.
The amendment is carried.
Well, no, no amendments carried until we ask for votes against. That's how it works, Tyler. Those against, raise their hands.
Now the amendment is carried.
Correct.
11 to 3, noting Councillor Hamilton, Councillor Donovan and Councillor McPherson dissenting.
Okay. Yeah. The amendment becomes a substantive motion, which we will now vote on. So those in favour of the substantive motion, please raise their hands. That's all hands raised. There are none against. That time you can assume, Tyler.
The motion is carried unanimously.
Thank you. Councillors, let's break for morning tea. Come back at 1:15 by that clock up there. Thanks. and Māngai. So the meeting's recommenced. Councillors, Ewan, please. Ewan. Shh. I'm just going to give Lachlan a chance to make a really quick statement before we start the next item.
Thank you, Chair. It was just a disclosure, I think, for good order. I wanted to just disclose an interest arising in that last item, and it's that I'm a trustee of the Sisters of Our Lady of the Missions Trust, which is the property-owning trust at Sacred Heart Girls' College in Ham East. I didn't think it was necessary, but the way that the questions evolved on reflection, it's a disclosure I'd just like to make, and I've provided Amy with some wording, so hopefully that just hits the record eventually. So thank you.
Yeah, we'll just have that recorded in the minutes for good order, as Lachlan says. Thanks. So moving on to item 7, which is the DC's judicial review, which Greg and Lachlan are giving again.
Sure, hello again. Just a short intro. This item is to provide a summary outcome of the judicial review that we've talked about many times, which is AgPac Limited and others versus HCC. It's also to describe, there's sort of a short list of several items of direction given by the judge, which I'm planning to do through the annual plan update to the DC policy, which is the same place, by the way, where we would do the last item if there's an amendment coming out of that. The third one is just a short update on the interest rate refunds, which we're currently working our way through that process, and that was something that was resolved prior to the decision and to the judge's satisfaction. And perhaps paragraph 21 is the summary of the outcome, I guess, if you want to just have a summary to quickly flick to. And finally, in the case of the pursuing costs in relation to the case, I'll just pass to Lachlan to make a quick summary of that.
Thanks, Greg. So this is in relation to the resolution 3B, which is a proposed resolution not to recover legal and disbursement costs in relation to the case. So that's a decision that's being requested of councillors today. The staff recommendation is not to attempt to recover costs, and I just want to give some context to that recommendation. The total costs incurred in terms of legal and also the expert disbursements and some and other costs was $577,000 in respect of the litigation. If you were to make an application for costs, they would be calculated based on a scale that the High Court applies, and if you were successful, our calculation is that you may be able to recover between $100,000 to $130,000 if successful. So you would never get right back to an indemnity of your costs incurred. You'd be more, we think, in the region of between $100,000 and $130,000. That's not guaranteed, of course. We'd have to argue that, and it would be an opposed application. The big factor that, of course, would be counting against council getting costs would be that this was in the nature of public interest litigation, and that's always a factor that the court considers in the sense that it doesn't want to deter legitimate issues that have public interest being brought before it. So the point is that of your total of 577 of costs, if you were successful, you'd potentially be looking at about 100 to 130. Now, against that background, there is some overtures, I suppose, that this council has made towards the development community in terms of the bridge building exercise, moving on from the litigation, and the most immediate manifestation of that bridge building exercise is this developer forum which has been set up, and I understand that forum had its first meeting this week.
Yes.
And by all accounts it was very positive. It seems like there's issues that have been put on the table which will be basically developed and thrashed out, and there seems to be a degree of satisfaction from the developers that that has the potential to be quite effective for it. So if you were to turn around and pursue costs, of course, it would potentially have an impact on what you might call some of the goodwill that is starting to develop, and that's a factor for you to consider. Overall, on balance, my recommendation is that this is a situation where, and not in any way discounting the serious money involved, I do think on balance there's merit in not pursuing costs. So that's all I have to say, unless there's questions.
Okay, so I've got Councillor Robb first up.
Just one question, Chair, and that's not on Lachlan's speech, but on the refund of interest, which was agreed to with the judge prior to the decision. Have we quantified that value?
We're getting closer. It's more complicated than I'd hoped, and I thought it was going to be complicated. So,
okay.
So the best estimate I've got at the moment is about circa 400,000. Okay. I'm a bit cautious about putting a number out because essentially do all of the calculations and the interest on money held, and we're working through PwC on verifying the interest rates. But I think that's about the best indication.
So that's a good indicator for us, because it does have an effect on our balancing the books figure, doesn't it? The interest component is in fact a direct.
It is
a direct offset against an operating cost.
Yeah, you would know better than me, I'm sure, but from my understanding, it would be essentially a cash payment would be what it's equivalent to. Yeah.
Okay, and we will, and the intent is to pay that out before the 30th of June, so it will impact on this current year.
May, June is currently where we're anticipating, but on the other hand, if there's direction for good reason, for a time after that, really, because that's how long it's going to take to get it all the way through the whole process. So currently May, June.
Can you keep us informed of that? Because obviously we're starting in the next few days on the annual plan for the following year.
Absolutely.
And presumably that could be a cost in one of either of those two particular years, this year or the following year.
I will do that, and I'll brief Tracy and David Bryant too, just so because you'll be in the finance committees with them, just so they've got that bit of information.
Great, thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Mayor Paula and then Ryan, thanks.
Not a question, but happy to move the stuff.
Oh, okay, well, we'll take that, and I'll second it. Ryan, thanks.
Thanks. On page 26, just a few...
Can you speak up a bit?
Sorry, page 26, just a few of the judicial directions that have been given to us. The first one, just on site credits. Expectation the HCC will now entertain requests for refunds, etc. Can you just clarify what that means?
The judge, well, Lachlan might, if I don't get this right, but the judge wanted to make sure that council followed through on providing refunds on site credits, and so in his judgment, he reserved judgment that if they weren't done in a satisfactory manner, or he received complaints, then he may step back in. But there's not, I mean, that won't happen. The total site credits is only about $100,000 in total. It's actually quite, in the scheme of things, quite small money. And we've gone out directly to every, we either, the letters are in the pipeline or they've gone out to every developer that could potentially have a refund, saying here's the process. You have an option now under the new policy. So it's all front-footed. So I think it's straightforward, and we're certainly going to provide anyone who asks for a refund that legitimately should get one, they get it.
And we'll amend the policy going forward?
The policy's amended.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just on that point, there was just a timing issue.
Right.
The court case was in May of last year, and of course your decision on the new policy was a 30 June decision. So all I was able to tell the judge in court was that the draft policy that's currently out for consultation has resolved this issue, but I couldn't guarantee what the council decision would be on the 30th of June.
Yeah.
And the idea would be that, well, if you don't deliver the decision that I'm expecting, I'll want to hear about it.
Got it.
And you did deliver the decision, so it's done.
And finally, for point 14, I don't know if this is a Chris Allen question, that as part of its annual review, HCC will consider how best to address the prospect of greater anomalies in future as multi-level dwellings become more prevalent with higher density developments. I guess this has only just gone on steroids even since.
Yes, it has. This is now, I think, probably a real issue for you. So this was the case against the council in relation to the stormwater calculations, which was based on bedrooms, was that, well, that can give rise to anomalies because you can have, you know, very small footprints with lots of bedrooms, particularly as you increase densities, and therefore bedrooms becomes a really bad proxy for measuring what your impermeable surface is, which creates stormwater. So we basically argued in court that the current approach of bedrooms was perfectly lawful and was perfectly reasonable, but that as Hamilton evolved and the densities started to increase, that may give rise to reconsideration of whether bedrooms is the best proxy. And as you say, based on everything that we're seeing at the moment out of central government, that time has come. So I expect that this particular issue will be one of the features of the proposed new policy next year, a potential alternative to the bedrooms.
Thank you.
I should just say that's staff recommendation 3C part 2 is recommending that we look at that and when we come to you with a draft DC policy that we've considered that and there may be changes.
Just on that, Greg, sorry, why is it just limited to residential stormwater in the resolution?
Because that was the issue that they raised. That they had an issue, and that their issue in their case was about residential stormwater and the bedroom approach.
Okay, councillors, there's no other questions that I can see. I'm just casting around. No. So we have the staff recommendation moved by Mayor Paula, seconded by myself. That's the bottom half of page 23 there. Paula, do you wish to speak to that?
Just very brief.
Can you speak into the mic, please? It's just a request from Zoom land that all councillors...
Hang on a second. I just have to shove you over a weeny bit. Not really near the microphone.
That's better,
Thank you. Thank you to staff for all the good work that you've done on this, and it's a good result for Hamilton, a very good result. It validates the work that we've done in putting together a robust development contribution policy, and I understand there has been tension here, so I really do support the opportunity to talk further with the development community about how we work together to make them the ability for them to do business easier in Hamilton as we go forward, and so I've always been supportive of that. And so, you know, we have now got ourselves into a position, we've got a forum working with developers, which is good. Had the first meeting the other day, and I understand that went very well, so I'm really pleased to hear that. And I think, you know, we've got to go forward positively. We rely on developers to build our city. They are partners with us, so a partnership process should always prevail. But congratulations to staff. It took a lot of time and effort on your behalf to get this through, but the result was pretty resounding, and so I guess you feel a great sense of relief and pride in the work that you've done, and you should. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll just add a couple of bits then on to Councillor Wilson and Taylor, just in relation to the meeting that we had yesterday in the developer forum, which was very good. One of the things that was highlighted by the developers who were there, or at least one of them seemed to be agreed to by the other, was that some of the daggers drawn sort of attitude between the parties went back to a period pre-2010, which was around the time we were first introducing DCs in a big way. They didn't say that, I'm saying that part, and that there've been issues ever since, and perhaps a lack of trust developing as a result of that. So there was an agreement that we would be working to try and change that and trying to smooth pathways, administrative pathways through councils when developments are proposed, and have early meetings between the parties, not things that are legally required, but things that make sense. Discussions that make sense in terms of setting the right framework, right groundwork, making sure that the issues, the points of difference are identified early and they're isolated and worked on, while other major parts of developments can be got on with. All of that sort of stuff would be a better way of working than to the more formalistic way. There are going to be DCs going into the future. We know that, and they know that, and we're trying to get past that being a point of argument and fighting. So that was quite a good sort of outcome for that, which has derived really from this case, and thanks to the staff and Lachlan and others who did the work on that for us to, I think it enabled both sides to air their views quite well and to move forward from that. So I'll move on to the speaking order to Councillor Wilson, then Taylor, then Pascoe.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Dave. I feel I needed to speak because on this occasion I'm going to support the motion moved by the Mayor and seconded by you, Chair Dave, and that is to forego pursuing the developers over legal fees. Frequently in this chamber on other issues, I have taken a very opposite position. I have taken a position of pursue everybody whenever possible. But on this occasion, I think the staff report is absolutely appropriate. First of all, I want to say how lucky we are, and I'll say it again, how lucky we are to have such capable and competent staff in this field. All of local government New Zealand was looking at this entire case, because it was so significant for how local government calculates development contributions. And so our victory was in fact a victory for local government and in a roundabout way for ratepayers around the country. So to Greg and your team, well done. We're also really blessed to have a very, very, very competent legal counsel. So we're very lucky. Where I find some comfort in supporting the motion is we now have to develop an ongoing relationship with these developers. And they too are an essential part of what the city will become. They are our partners. And although, you know, they come from a commercial, tough background, and often with tough commercial background, you manage that by being just as tough. But an element of that is also to show an olive branch, and I think that's important. So for the councillors, Councillor Dave, Ryan, Councillor Donovan and Angela, I'm really confident with that sort of elected members' involvement that we will have early chats, because commercial developers want some form of certainty as to what it's going to cost them and what the lay of the land is. And so I think if they're informed early, they will then make commercial decisions about what their projects are going to do. Where if there is that lack of certainty, you will certainly get a developer's backup when they've calculated on one scenario and suddenly they're presented with something different. So I fully support it, and I'm very grateful for the outcome. So again, thank you, gentlemen and team.
Thanks. Jeff, thanks.
Thanks, Dave. Very quickly, endorse the previous speakers. I support not pursuing costs as well. As has been said, there's no guarantee with success for these things. And I also think it would be show really poor judgment in terms of our relationship with the development community. The judicial review obviously caused a lot of work, it cost a lot of money, but endorsed the expertise of our staff and our legal advice. And I guess, you know, if there's no tension between a council and developers on DCs, then we're probably not doing our job right. There has to be some tension, I think, because we have to look after the ratepayers, obviously. And although it was a lot of work, there was probably some benefit for us to know that our DC policies are robust. They're very enormously complicated animals, and for elected members, it provides reassurance to know that we're in the right place with these things, and this process totally endorsed that. But it's really important to go on from here, as Mayor Southgate and others have said, and improve our relationship with the development community. It's just not in the interests of this council or the city to be at odds. And the judicial review was a real nadir in terms of our relationship there, and we don't ever want to be going back to that. So I think the forum that's been set up is excellent, the developer reference group, and I would hope that group is going to pick up on a wide range of things, because there's lots of little niggling frustrations that you get on both sides, no doubt, and if we can just smooth that out and keep talking, keep the dialogue going, it'll be great. And if we can get together a lot more closely from now on, so we don't ever have a repeat of this legal action, that will be my hope. Thank you.
Thanks. Rob, please.
Thanks, Chair. And look, I'll echo comments of my earlier comments from colleagues. I think the court decision has crystallised a number of issues and mistrust. I remember in 2014 being seconded to a forum initiated by Mayor Hardacre, and I think listening to Dave, who goes back further than I do, probably these tensions were created or started back in 2010, and I think that they showed up significant issues and a degree of mistrust between council and developers, and at that time they were threatening legal action. So in some ways I'm quite pleased that we have been through that process now, and we've come out the other side favourably, and we've also tweaked a few things that we and the developers have agreed probably have created some unfairness. So I think there's a good outcome here for both the council and the developer community, and I also support, as Deputy Mayor does, that we don't pursue costs here. I think this developer reference group, which I think will be similar to the one that we had under Mayor Hardacre, but in a different space going forward, will be a great touch point for working through the issues that the developers have with council. And look, we talk about protecting the ratepayer, but these developers are also customers of council too, in the same way that ratepayers are. And so therefore we should be making sure that we do have Councillor Ewan's catchphrase there of certainty and trust in terms of when they're putting together a development, that they know for certain what the DCs are going to be, and that they trust that when the bill comes from council, it will be the amount that was certain at the time of doing their costings. So good luck to the developer forum. I hope it works. I hope we do work with continued tension with the group, but at the same time get some really, really good outcomes for a growing city that we are, and retaining these good developers in the city to help the city grow. Thanks.
Thanks, Rob. Ryan, please.
Thanks again, just building on what everyone said. I mean, the developers wanted our attention, and they got it, and I think the result got their attention. But feedback is the breakfast of champions, and I think we've got some good feedback, and I think on reflection, our process was correct. We were following the letter of the law, but I think their grudge was more the spirit of the law, and that our relationship had strayed. And I think, as has been touched on our meeting yesterday, is the opportunity to close that gap and identify some low-hanging fruit, short, medium, and long term. I'm really keen for us to be best in business. Our policy now has showed us that we're robust on the national stage, and now we've got to just streamline that relationship stuff and that process stuff. It's important there's a tension, a healthy tension. And the other thing which came out really strongly yesterday was they're just not aware of the central government stuff that's coming our way. And so there's a real disconnect between them actually trying to identify with the struggles that we have, and so there's an opportunity for us to share that journey and close that as well. So it's a good thing.
Sorry.
Councillor Mark 2.
Yeah. Okay, Mark 2.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to add much more because it's all already been said, but look, I'm going to use an analogy of being in a marriage and having been through one and then come out the other side. Someone suggested to me that you follow a model called SCARF, which is status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness and fairness. And I think in this situation, we've reached an agreement where it really feels like there's a lot of those things all being in sync with each other, which is a really, really good place to be, because at the heart of it, and Rob touched on it, and the word's been thrown around by a couple of other people, is that relationships are built on trust. And I think that between us and the developers, if we can keep building this relationship all around trust, then we're going to create something really special. So I also want to endorse Ryan's comment that feedback is the breakfast of champions. I think that's fantastic. I'm going to use that. Just put that one in here. Thanks. Yeah, come to me for any marriage counselling.
And SCARF sounds like Otago Uni students are at it again. Paula, did you have a right of reply?
I wasn't going to, but I will. I agree 100% with what everyone has said. And Ryan, of course, you make a massive positive point there. Through the process, we have picked up bits and pieces of feedback, and also we've been able to establish that relationship. I particularly wanted, in this term of politics, to establish a positive and constructive relationship with the development community, which is why we set up that forum that we've been talking about for some time. And so, look, I'm really happy that that will be the place for those positive and constructive conversations, not just on development contributions, but how we work together to build a better city, which is what we're all about, because I think we're particularly blessed with passionate developers who actually have the well-being of Hamilton at heart. I think we're seeing so much movement from developers who want to come in and redefine how Hamilton looks and feels to live in, to work in, to play in. And we need them. We absolutely need them. So I support my colleagues 100% in this. Let's put this behind us. Take the learnings, put it behind us, and focus on those constructive conversations where we can get the best out of each other going forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Paula. Well, show of hands vote. Thanks. Those in favour of the resolution raise their hands. On Zoom as well. Yes, that is everyone. So, Tyler, we don't need to vote against.
The motion is carried unanimously.
Yeah. Actually, just apropos of that discussion we've just had, I don't know whether any of you saw the article and stuff this morning from the Rabobank saying what a great place Hamilton was to do business in. So that was sort of along the lines of what we've been talking about, quite good feedback. And Blair, just fill us in a bit on the future plans for reporting back in this area.
Thank you, Chair. So we do provide an update. We do provide an update on the GM report on the Strategic Developer Forum, but we will more formally report back in the February meeting. Helpfully, Kelvin Eglinton, past General Manager in my role at Council, has been engaged by the developers as their key representative, conduit point. So he and I will work very closely together as we shape up and work up our collective work program for the group. There will be short, medium and long-term initiatives that we will pursue, and we will also bring back the final terms of reference. The draft came to the last committee meeting, you'll recall, for your visibility. And I think we share a lot of commonality in terms of the aspirations and outcomes. And so I can see tremendous opportunities for us to build off the conversation yesterday. One of the things that that was presented to the group yesterday was a summary of feedback of areas that the development community felt they wanted to share with us to help us with some of the early areas for focus. That will be a valuable piece of information as we start to work through opportunities to align and build that strong relationship. So look out for a more comprehensive report back in our February committee meeting. In the meantime, I'll be working with Kelvin to establish that project and how we resource that from both sides. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Look, we're on to the future-proof update, which is item 8. Hannah is going to take us through this. So floor's yours, Hannah, thanks.
Morning, councillors.
Sorry, can you speak into this? We've had a request to speak louder and more into these from the Zoom land.
No problem. Morning, councillors. So today's future-proof report provides an update on the timeline and process for hearings and deliberations, which begin next week. It also outlines a process for council to provide additional feedback into any proposed amendments that are proposed to that strategy after the deliberations. There's also an update in the report on the progress of the Metro Spatial Plan Transport Program business case. So we've got Phil Hazelden online to answer any questions about that aspect of the report. I'll take the report as read. I would like to draw your attention to a few key points, as well as some new information that we have received since the report was written in relation to the submissions that have been received on the strategy, and some of the key themes that are evident in those. So the submission period was open from 4th of October through until 12th of November, and there were 54 submissions received on that, and 45 of those indicated they wish to be heard, so they will be appearing next week, 7th, 9th and 10th. Just a few stats on what those submissions covered at a high level. So approximately 64% of those were supportive or supportive in part of the draft strategy. 30% were opposed or opposed in part. What's really interesting is that 21 of the submissions focused on the out-of-sequence or unanticipated development. And 40% of those were land relating to the Waipa district, 17% in the Waipa, and 11 near the HCC boundary. So that's the emerging areas that everyone around the table is aware of, and we've had quite a bit of discussion about those over the last few months. So that tells you that the hearings are really going to be focusing on those proposals that are coming forward for people that want to come and bring their development faster than it is currently drafted for in the strategy. So at the hearings, as those presentations are going on, the draft strategy at the moment sets out a number of criteria that those proposals need to meet in order to be brought forward, and the hearings panel will be making decisions on that. Also in the report, you'll see there's a detailed timeline set out which shows the process through to final strategy adoption, which is planned for April next year. So what we have done is we've been speaking with the Future-Proof team about bringing back information as those deliberations progress so that the wider council is aware of what changes might be made. And that's not just for us, that's for our local government partners as well. So we've been speaking with our neighbouring councils about how we best do that, given that it would be preferable to do that before a final strategy for adoption comes back. So there's also a recommendation you'll see under 3C that requests that staff continue those conversations to ensure that that process goes ahead. I'll leave it at that, but I'm happy to answer any questions. We've also got Amy here if there's any questions on the HBA, which is mentioned in the report as well.
Yep, thanks. I've got a few questioners to go there, and I'll move the staff recommendation as the seconded by Ryan. Sorry,
that's all right.
He beat you to it. So I've got Martin, Ryan, then Paula with questions at this point.
Process.
Yeah.
First of all, to Hannah, it's a team, so people can, obviously there'll be a list of submitters and elected members can via Teams watch those submissions being delivered, I understand, because there will be some quite interesting, relevant, well, all are relevant, but, given the profound importance of this hearings process.
Yeah, it's available for anyone that wants to dial in. We can make sure that that's circulated to everyone so that they've got it there, and the list of hearings and the times of submitters.
The second question is
just if I just add to that, Councillor, the submission hearings information has been provided by Diligent. An email went out from the governance staff, I think yesterday, identifying where in Diligent that is located. So there's quite a large amount of information, quite voluminous, as you can imagine, but it's there for all elected members to peruse. Noting that Councillor Dave is obviously representing Hamilton on the actual hearings panel.
The second question is the Governance Manager, and I'm sorry if I haven't given you prior notice of this. You'll be aware of some email traffic. I'm gravely concerned that there is a clash between an elected member session, which is including an item I raised earlier, plus the annual plan that clashes, and it means that at least 2 elected members cannot go to that EM session. I'm wondering through the chair if we could further discuss that. I see.
Yeah, well, I don't want to do that in this meeting, but we should discuss it offline to...
No, I've got people working on it in the background.
That's fine. That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to be helpful, as I always am.
Great, you are. Yes, Councillor Ryan.
Thanks. Just a question of process for the future-proof submissions. All the emerging areas that we've talked about, we just put them all on the table and they largely go into it unless there's pushback from any one of the partners? Is that how it works?
You're talking about that pushback on any specific
emerging area.
Development areas or that sort of thing?
Or they say we focus on density, we don't want any. How does it work?
So what happens is all of the emerging areas that you have been privy to or have come into council have also submitted on Future Proof. We have directed them that is the appropriate process for them to get the first piece of recognition as to whether they change their timing. So they will all be presenting at these hearings, and the hearings deliberations panel will make recommendations to the Future Proof Implementation Committee about whether they are signalled in that strategy for short, medium or long-term development or added to the strategy if they're not already in there. What then happens is that really sets the direction for us in our HUGs and our more detailed density and specific investment timing discussion. So it's all quite linked.
So those recommendations you refer to...
Sorry, can you speak up a bit? It's really, you are being quiet.
Those recommendations that HCC has or gives, do we see that, a visibility to that?
Well, that's what we're requesting from the Future Proof panel, that anything that the hearings panel comes up with needs to come back to council for a discussion and for them to have an opportunity to provide feedback back.
Hang on. Paula and I have actually asked for that specifically, so before we go into decision-making process at Future Proof, we have the discussion with the elected members here, so we get your directions, basically.
And that is a recommendation, I think it was C in the report.
3C.
Councillor Ryan, the other thing to note is that next week is really for the hearings panel, which Councillor Day is part of, to hear the presentations and to ask questions. Following those presentations next week, there'll be a chance for the hearings panel to then convene and identify any further information they may wish. Those questions will then go back, and it won't be until the new year that they will start to then discuss some thoughts, and it is that point in time which we have signalled that needs to come back to this table so that we have a chance to provide our input. Likewise, our other partners would want to do the same before the hearings panel makes final recommendations to Future Proof on the strategy. So we're very conscious of the many interlinking conversations between both Future Proof and equally our parallel HUGs conversations as well.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Paula, thanks.
Thank you. Just on the feedback that you said, so given those issues just on the boundary and on the periphery...
Sorry, can you speak into the mic again? Sorry, Paula.
Oh, sorry. Given the issues on the boundary and the periphery, did I say that right? I think I did. Thank you. I'm wondering what our position will be in terms of complying with the intent of Future Proof, going from the principles to the measuring the implementation of Future Proof, and have we got any thoughts about how we can strengthen that? Because I think Future Proof is a fantastic document. It's been recognised in Wellington and everywhere as an amazing spatial planning exercise and document. So, Blair, do you get where I'm coming from? How we work with our partners to make sure that everything that is implemented is consistent with the intent of Future Proof?
Well, I think that's, as Hannah referred to, there are some very clear principles in the strategy that guide Future Proof as a partnership to work through these types of matters.
So moving it from principles to practice?
Yeah, and that's core, and that's core to how we as partners give effect to those principles as well in terms of our conversations. So as an example, as Hannah said, as part of the Future Proof report, there's also an update from Phil Hazard on the transport program business case, which has come to various briefings of this council. That's one example of a clear direction that we are, as a council, supporting, that development in the future should be anchored around accessibility and anchored around sort of frequent and rapid public transport networks. So that's an example of a principle, Mayor Paula, that we would be looking to test against any of these proposals, and there are a raft of other things that sit in that same line, and they are highly aligned with the work that we have done over the last few years around both future-proof and Metro Spatial Plan to kind of describe the type of future development we want to see.
And I think as well as what Blair's just said, we've also started some very initial conversations about how we're going to move into that implementation phase after the strategy is adopted, not waiting until it's adopted, but thinking about those kind of partnerships and funding discussions and everything that needs to happen to implement that.
That was going to be my second question, is what can we bring to the table in terms of matching funding? We've got initiatives like the Southern Wastewater Plant and others to talk about in terms of we have it planned for, we understand where we're all going. Money's going to be the critical point there.
And look, I won't get ahead of the hugs item, which is coming up on the agenda, but obviously there are many, many considerations that we as a council and Future-Proof have to think about with all of these proposals. We, unlike other metro areas, we have a lot more options available to us to consider in terms of growth. Some areas, such as Tauranga, have a lot more challenges than say we do in terms of geographical considerations, the sea relative to corridors, other risks. So in many ways we are, maybe the word is blessed for choice, but we have a lot of options and choice in front of us, which means that our thresholds and principles will be really important as we consider those against all these opportunities.
Thank you. And just in terms of, were there very many, I'll try and listen into some of the hearings next week. Were there many submissions on the natural environment, any on soils, for example?
Off the top of my head, I've got a high-level summary of the themes.
Maybe you can just tell me afterwards if you like.
Follow up if you like.
Yeah, that would be good. Thanks. Thank you.
One other thing that I'd like to identify, which is perhaps a little bit of a worry of mine, is that even though we're all in this together, clearly the development, the infrastructure needed for developments around the periphery of the city are going to be funded by our council, not by Waipara and Waikato, and yet they are going to try through Future-Proof, I fear, to have an inordinate amount of say over what happens and not, especially a certain council just to the south of us, which I won't name, that has a couple of planners in senior positions. I am seriously concerned that our wishes might, which are not won't be in a majority of that committee, may have some difficulty getting through there, that the growth that we're facing in and around the city is not fully recognised by our geographical partners. So I don't know whether, Blair, you want to comment on that. You've heard me on this theme a little bit.
What I would say is that is one of the reasons why we have many governance communication channels that we utilise to navigate that and many other considerations. And so the council-to-council direct meetings that are, in addition to Future-Proof, are designed to help us have those conversations. You are quite correct that infrastructure is an extremely significant consideration, and I notice that Chris Allen is in the room with any questions on that. And equally, considerations such as the future size of Hamilton City's boundary, land expansion areas, when areas come into the city jurisdiction, is all part of that conversation. So it's a complex and ongoing conversation, linked to, as I say, things such as our direct governance conversations and our strategic land agreements that we are progressing with neighbouring councils.
Thanks. Look, that was just not really a question of mine. It was to alert them to an issue that I think may come up in terms of the process. I've got Councillor Gallagher. You don't have a question. Good. I didn't mean that in any negative way, but it's not an invite either. We'll go to voting on the resolution, which is there, number 3 on page 82. Those in favour, please raise their hands. Can't see all of the screen there now because of the notice that's in front of it, but that's, yep, all hands are raised.
The motion is carried unanimously.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, thanks for that. We'll go on to the wastewater detailed business case. Sorry? Oh, Jackie's online. Morena? No, it's not. It's afternoon now. Sorry, Jackie, we're running a little bit later than we would have liked, but you and Peter Winder, afternoon now, Peter. And the floor is yours, I guess. Is it Jackie? Are you leading off? You're on mute, Jackie. So are you, Peter. Don't think.
Multiple mute buttons.
Unclick them all and you'll get there.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Am I speaking loud enough? I hear that that's been an issue.
Not from Zoom land, only from the people here.
Tēnā tātou katoa. Our paper this month is an overall update to you on the status of both the Southern and Northern Metro Wastewater Detailed Business Case projects. And it's really just a refresher and precursor to the key decisions that we'll be seeking on the Southern Metro Wastewater Detailed Business Case in the new year. But just to highlight a few key points in the paper, with respect to the Southern Metro DBC, as you're aware, there have been delays in completing the MOU and finalising the draft document for consideration by the governance group and the respective committees within each organisation. As I've noted previously in our update reports to you, the key elements and principles to be included in the detailed business case and the MOU have been approved and endorsed by the project governance group throughout the project. And we've also reported those through to this committee through our regular project updates. And so the final documents will not introduce any new material matters from those that have already been approved, but rather seeking the final sign-off on the project outputs. Unfortunately, we've been unable to line up a time and date where all the governance group members are available to meet before Christmas. And so we'll be scheduling for that to happen in late January, early February. And following that meeting, we'll be holding a combined briefing of elected representatives across the partnership. So that's the three councils and Waikato Tainui, ahead of the final documents being presented to the respective committees within each organisation, including this one. Despite those delays though, there remains urgency in undertaking the investigations for the new Southern Wastewater Treatment Plant. And in line with the agreed principles, HCC will be the lead council for the Southern plant. And so we've started the planning for that project in parallel with completing the Southern Metro DBC. In the paper, I've noted or signalled again the funding implications for delivering the Southern Wastewater Treatment Plant, noting that a request for additional funding may be required through the annual plan and long-term planning processes to complete land acquisition, consenting and designation processes, and that new funding will be required to finance construction of the plant beyond 2024 and 2025. In the paper, I've also just provided a really high-level progress update on the Northern Metro DBC, which is well underway now, and we'll be providing updates on that work to the governance group in the new year as well, including the assessment of the shortlisted options, which are looking at whether we retain both Ngaroa Wahia and Pukete treatment plants to serve the needs of the north, or whether all of the flows are directed to Pukete. So that's just the high-level update, and happy to take any questions.
Okay, we don't have any questions that I can see at the moment. If there aren't, thanks very much for that. Peter, did you want to add to that report? No, Peter's happy with that too. All councillors, that's very good. We've been kept well up to date on that. And as we've said before, we wished other councils around the country had also been kept up to date with all of these three water issues. So we really appreciate the fact that we've been up with the play here. Thanks, Jackie, and to the whole team working in that area, and Peter. So I'll just go straight to the resolution, recommendation, which on number 2 on page 91, which I'll move, and Ryan can Paula can, since she missed out last time. That's why. Okay, Paula seconded it. Okay, are there any speakers to that? I don't feel the need to speak. Yeah, I was going to ask you next, Paula.
Thanks. Just thank you to all the work that's gone into this. It's a comprehensive piece of work and it's really complex and technical. I just want to make one point. This is where planning and implementation do interface. The planning has been robust and through several iterations of analysis. And we finally landed on this. I have good confidence that this is the right solution. We do need to keep our eye on the ball in terms of future funding. Wastewater plants are not cheap. They don't come cheap. And we've got the money in the budget for funding. But as Jackie rightly says, for feasibility, not feasibility, scoping, what's it called? The plan? We're investigating it, but we haven't got any money to build it, is what I'm saying. That's a bit clumsily put. So we do know, councillors, that in a number of years' time we'll be asked for some serious coin towards this, as will our future-proof partners. Otherwise, it won't build itself. So I'll just make that point.
Thanks, Paula. Right, excuse me. Move to the vote now. Those in favour of the recommendation, raise their hands. That's unanimous. Yep. Thanks very much. Thanks, Jackie and Peter. We're now on to the HUGS review. And here comes Stafford, right on time. He's been following your system, Blair, watching what's going on.
Oh, he has.
Thanks, Stafford. The floor is yours.
Thank you, councillors. Good afternoon. As much as I'd like to take credit for good timing, unfortunately I think Karen will just be joining me shortly, so we're not quite fully well-oiled here. So I just wanted to introduce this item by saying that HUGS is our spatial vision for the city, and it outlines how we manage growth. It's the where, when and how of our growth story. It's a long-term strategy that outlines, that informs other plans such as the long-term plan and the 30-year infrastructure strategy, along with infrastructure investment, timing and master planning. HUGS is striving to deliver great growth outcomes. So we want to drive outcomes for the community, such as delivering clarity to the community and our partners on how Hamilton will grow in the future. And this will help, in turn, make it easier for staff to be more efficient in delivering good outcomes for the community and planning for this growth. We've continued progressing HUGS review. However, as you'll be aware, the recent government announcements have meant that the initial direction of the project needed to be changed. The major impact of these announcements has been an increase in the capacity for intensification within the city, and we're keeping a close eye on how this unfolds in alignment with the work that the district plan is doing. Based on direction from the HUGS reference group, staff are proceeding to update the HUGS to reflect the changes to intensification and to reflect our current commitment and our planned growth areas, and to enable the progression of emerging areas as they meet the out-of-boundary development principles, but not before. So with that, I'd be happy to take questions on the report.
Thanks. I've got a couple just to kick things off, or one comment and one question. Just yesterday at the developer forum that we had, Karen was at, we had one developer make a very strong point, and I personally think there's a lot of merit in it, that once the pandemic issues are over, or if not solved as a pandemic, at least how we're handling that is developed, and there's vaccine passes are up and running, and there's more movement allowed between regions, particularly Auckland and the rest, that they believe, and they sound like they're planning for, I think they called it a tsunami of movement from Auckland down to areas like nearby, like ours, obviously Bay of Plenty in Northland as well, much more than has been expected in past. And I added to that was the news from a couple of weeks ago that for the first time ever in a 12-month period, Auckland's population had declined marginally, which seems to sort of add some impetus to that argument, and perhaps the growth we're counting on is going to be greater than even our optimistic or what do we call the growth as opposed to the middle or the conservative estimates. So I just sort of want to check in our thinking in HUGS how well prepared we are for something happening quite a bit faster than was envisaged, and whether we can roll out our planning to cope with that. Obviously, infrastructure will need to follow that quite quickly as well. So that's the one bit. The other one was just in relation to point 2B in the staff recommendation, where you're reporting back to the March 22 committee meeting on the draft HUGS document. I want to make sure that there's going to be work done with that the HUGS working group is going to be convened before that, for instance, because that will identify areas, as will the future-proof discussions we're about to have, hearings, will identify areas that we're talking about that'll be in the fast track or medium term or longer term, that sort of thing, that we're going to have a say in what comes back to the next committee meeting, or the 2 more committee meetings. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. The HUGS reference group date is being confirmed shortly. I believe it will be in late February to help inform that. So I'm working with the governance team to find a time for that reference group.
Seems a little bit late.
We want to also engage with you prior to that to check in. So I think there'll be a couple of touch points before then where we can align, and there's also a strategic growth committee meeting in early February where we can, I think the 15th of February. So I think there's a few opportunities for us to come back and make sure that we're aligned, and we don't want to bring any surprises to you. So I hope at that March meeting it's a very
which will be a late March meeting.
Late March meeting.
Yeah.
Stafford, I don't know if you heard before, it's just the interlink between HUGS and the strategy and the future-proof submissions and that process, and particularly for Councillor Dave and this committee being able to give feedback prior to future-proof taking a final position. So it's just the interlink. So I think the dates that Councillor Chair Dave's talking about is just how we ensure that this committee and Chair Dave is informed ahead of any formal HUGS reference groups, and just ties them at the future-proof process.
Thank you, Blair. That's really helpful. I think this just highlights that there's a lot of balls in the air at the moment, and we need to try and make sure that they all land perfectly within the timeframes of HUGS. So,
and any thoughts on the rate of growth?
The rate of growth thing, I think what you've highlighted is that the work that Nathan's team is doing with this dwelling projection model that sort of updated other factors other than the just solely demographic projections is really important. So I am working closely with Nathan's team to understand that, and we're going to just take the best information we have available for HUGS, and we want to wind in that type of thinking into our project. I think while HUGS is a 50-year strategy, we definitely need to have a view to that closer time frame, that more medium term, to make sure that there's no stumbling blocks on our way to the future.
Okay, and that will be part of future reports, how that's going from time to time, will it? That growth projection model?
Nathan will be bringing reports back to your committee.
Yep. Thanks. Martin, please.
Probably to Blair. I came onto this council in a second arrival in 2010 under Mayor Julie Hardacre. In view of the conversations that we had with Mayor Julie around our boundaries, what has now significantly changed? It's now 11 years later.
Look, I think we have worked particularly hard to develop strong relationships with our neighbouring councils, and we've got formal processes. We've advanced changes to our formal agreement with Waikato District Council. We're on the verge of bringing back an agreement with Waipa in terms of land agreements. So I think there's been tremendous progress at Future Proof and through Metro Spatial Plan. I don't think you would have ever heard in those days the concept of boundaryless planning and thinking. That is now enshrined in our everyday language and way we work. So I think you are seeing a demonstrable change in that way that we're working, Councillor Gallagher. Notwithstanding that the reality is we are still always dealing with the legacy of the 89 reforms that created the boundaries that we have in Hamilton at the present time. But we are using all and every means to work with our partners, work with our key stakeholders to achieve those long-term outcomes for our community. And I again reinforce this, our community does not stop at the edge of Hamilton boundary. Our community is a community that you could look at it through various lenses. It goes through that metro space out to sort of Cambridge, Tiamutu, Ngarawahia, Taupere to the north, other lenses, it goes beyond that. So it is a very much a boundaryless way that we're working and acting now.
Because obviously with the exception of the Kawerau District Council and the Napier City Council, we're one of the 3 TAs in the whole of the country, excluding Chatham's, that is under these constraints. That's correct, isn't it? And I acknowledge the consequences of the 89 reforms in this case. Yeah. Just the key question was out of boundary development principles, etc., development principles. Through HUGS, I've always wanted the strong discussion around what community of interest means in this. So while we talk about boundaryless planning, for example, with HT1, once the expressway is finished next year, we're going to have this big stranded triangle north of our city that's due to come to us. We may not be intending to develop it, but I'm just looking at when do we have the kind of the deep discussion. I know there are a number of factors as to at what point you have a community up there, just using an example that has 110% links with the city, nowhere else fundamentally. Their rates go somewhere else. They don't pay their way at all to us. At what point do we have the kind of that community of interest discussion as against, oh, we're not, we're going to develop, then we'll bring them in, but only when they're being developed?
I think it's an interesting point, and I think there's a little bit of a separation between when HUGS envisions timing of development and the boundary changes themselves. Some key points to consider are, like you've said, like where do these communities of interest really identify with? But additional to that, there's a value capture discussion to be had, where I think that we have a infrastructure funding challenge, and boundary changes are a very good opportunity for council to try and capture some of the value uplift that occurs when you change where the boundary is. The value of the land will be higher after a boundary change than it was prior, and I think for my mind we also have to have a view to how we can hold this land within Hamilton's boundary as an appropriate zoning. So I think there's a few processes to consider before we get there. From a HUGS perspective, there's irrespective of whether it's inside the boundary or outside the boundary, we're afforded an ability to plan for this land as we have the certainty of that boundary agreement already in place. But I take your point. It is a separate process that we need to consider when is appropriate to bring this into the city.
And I think, and just Chair, Dave, I just want to note my interest in land in one of those particular areas, and also note on behalf of Chris Allen his interest in land in that area as well. But I think, as Stafford has said, when land comes in the city doesn't necessarily indicate that land is then going to be developed immediately. So there is as Stafford said, there is a quite separate consideration there. So council could well advance some of those areas into the city in a short time frame. Does not mean that that land is then enabled for development. But as Stafford has said, if council chooses to pursue that, there are some things that council would want to consider, such as value capture, before that occurred.
So through the hugs.
Sorry, if I could just follow that strand from what Blair said there. We should be considering at least the advantage of taking land that's obviously going to come to the city into the city while not doing anything. At least then we're in full control over what happens, and we don't have to, when the proposal comes to us, scramble to negotiate with partners because it's already in the city legally. And that's one clear opportunity. R2 is another one, of course.
And that is, I think, where the HUGS project and the work that Stafford is leading is now thinking and considering all those various matters. And so as opposed to them being considered on an ad hoc basis, the principles speak to that. And as Councillor Chair Dave has said, the reasons that he's articulated are a strong reason as to why that land may come to the city earlier. It's just one of many factors that the project is wanting to consider.
So in February with the HUGS next working group, because as you know, I have a sense of huge Groundhog Day, really, but the point you're both raising is very relevant vis-a-vis the value capture aspect. I totally get that, and I totally get that that's a pink page conversation we need to have for some obvious commercial reasons. Is all this basically in February going to be sort of wrapped up? So politically, we as a council, as against what we thought in 2011, in 2021, we have a clear political view and leadership in terms of the direction of travel with regard to all of these areas.
I think, as you've alluded to, we need to land a position on a few key elements before we discuss timing of these boundary changes. And what I would like to propose is that HUGS and these boundary changes are very related but can occur in parallel. I think we're lucky that we've now recruited for a new position within council who is going to take over these emerging areas. So it's a new program of work, similar to how the Peacocks program has evolved over the last few years. So with the success of how that project has been managed, that's the approach that we're taking for other areas in the city, and we've identified these emerging areas around the boundary as a good candidate for that. So I think, to answer your question, there is a dedicated work stream around this now to work through these issues and make sure that we don't miss any opportunities.
Just a final clarification, picking up Chair Dave's point. Obviously, we'll be looking at the outer boundary development principle, value capture, but we'll also be looking at the current boundary community of interest principle as well. Am I on the same page there? So at least we can weigh all those up and come to some conclusion around direction of travel.
I think you're right there.
Thank you.
Thanks. Sarah, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Stafford. Just quickly, in terms of the draft principles for emerging areas, have we been receiving any feedback around that from development community and to date?
Yes, we have received some feedback. I think it ranges from very positive to quite apprehensive.
Yep.
We're recording that currently, and we'll bring it back through the reference group for consideration prior to progressing the HUGS draft for consultation formally. I would like to amend those draft principles, or provide an opportunity to amend those draft principles to that reference group and through council prior to their adoption, so we can get a more refined set out for that formal consultation.
Okay, and the principle that basically a development pays for, that all costs of infrastructure is covered, is that something that has been raised as likely as a kind of like a brick wall barrier to, or are developers thinking that they can achieve that?
I think something that has been highlighted through this process is that the principles are very good from a principle perspective, but there needs to be some further clarity on what we mean by all the costs of infrastructure. And I think through the process that I alluded to, we can start to narrow that scope. Something that we all know to be true is that there is this infrastructure funding challenge that we face, and through the HUGs and the council's approach, we require these partnerships to fund infrastructure. We're requiring additional help from central government through opportunities like the grants that they bring to us, and we need continued investment from the development community to help meet these very large infrastructure costs. So through HUGs, hopefully we can articulate where we expect the development community to chip in, where we are seeking opportunities for further funding from government, and an approach where we can use these alternative funding mechanisms such as IFF or whatever else comes through the pipeline. I think with all of these opportunities together, and council also dipping into our own balance sheet, we can have the best chance at providing good growth infrastructure to enable Hamilton to grow.
Councillor Sarah, if I can just briefly add to that, I think when we also think about infrastructure, it's infrastructure in a strategic sense beyond a particular area that may be knocking on the door saying, look at us. It is the wider city network, but equally it's the things such as water and access to water in terms of the overall allocation available to the city, and how we think about those precious resources. So there's some wider considerations that Stafford is sort of alluding to, that when you start to delve into those conversations, it's a lot more than just particularly that particular area, that the geographic area. It is much wider. So it's a big topic, and I think the great thing is that the HUGs project is now bringing all these competing matters together, and we're actually having to try and navigate our way through these really big rocks. But I would be remiss to not kind of reinforce that infrastructure is much more than just built stuff. It is the wider considerations, that consenting allocation policy framework as well.
Thank you.
Thanks. I've got seat 21, which I believe is Paula. Yeah, right.
Just a question in terms of the principles. My diligence just gone down here. In terms of how we might incorporate, I accept the principles and the complexity of out-of-boundary work, but is there likely to be any reference to developers who come with their own funding, either a public-private partnership, or are prepared to meet the cost early, whereas we might not have done the development until later, but they'll do it at their cost in order to get out of the gate, basically?
That's part of the answer, but I think just to channel my inner Chris Allen, these deals don't always, what they profess to be, they might not realise the real costs of infrastructure that is required to accommodate them in the city.
Yeah,
and
but,
it's also
but just,
around,
just as a matter of principle, if we did get that really good offer, Chris, and we got someone coming to the table and saying, look, we are so certain that we can deliver this, and we want to put this swale or bund or something in place, and we'll do it at our cost, and we'll enter an arrangement to have you buy that back off us at a top point in time, or whatever arrangement, or we're prepared to just do it. Would we then consider out of boundary, or was that principle not going to be? I know they're complicated, but you would deal with legal arrangements or a legal situation. We can't be surely closing the door.
I can try and answer that, and I can be corrected by my colleagues if I'm off track, but I think there would have to be consideration to that in terms of self-provision of infrastructure. But just at a simple level, most developers will say that they will provide all of the infrastructure, and I think what they're talking about is the infrastructure within their boundary and within their development. The real problem and the real issue for us is our priority allocation of our resources. So they all are coming and they all want to plug and play into our water and wastewater systems. So they're all competing for the same capacity. So the real challenge of the HUGs, and which is why we've got HUGs, is for council for a multi-dimensional approach to prioritise which ones you want to give priority to the scarce resources we've got, whether it's policy allocations or physical allocations.
All the challenges to better predict
I
what
agree
we're
with
going
all
to
that.
need going into the future.
Yep, and that's exactly why Jackie Collier's paper on the southern wastewater treatment is so important in a strategic context, because we need, in the long term, more capacity in wastewater and water. So that project is absolutely essential when we're starting to look at HUGs and the future growth and the timing of significant sort of growth cells. So in HUGs we need to jump up to that level to really do a good job in terms of what goes first. Like, everything can't go first, and what's really challenging now is the NPSUD and the new bill going through, which as of right, you could say they have now got priority to any capacity that's available. Is that right? Those are some of the issues that we need to work through. And is the reality of that growth coming to the table real? Just because it's plan enabled, we still need the team with you to assess when that growth will come and when they will use that allocation as well. So,
and where.
Where and when are the two big W's about HUGs.
I do get that. I'm just wondering if the principle is still going to be picked up, or if it's going to be fenced out from the get-go in those HUGs principles. Because you never know what... We still have to be open to opportunity, right?
100% it's in there, and we're working through how to progress
there will be counterbalances in there, but it will be factored in so that, too good to... Well, some things are too good to be true, but a really good opportunity that walks in, given that we can't keep up with the housing need right now, that's where I'm coming from. And even with what we've got on our books, it's not enough. So that's also where I'm coming from. Do you know what I mean?
Definitely, that's a big part of the outer boundary development principles. And as I was speaking about before, it's this process around the emerging areas that we need to tighten up. The detail is really important, and those other considerations like environmental limits and water allocation, there's a lot of competing elements to this way we manage growth. But as you've said, good opportunities when they come along, need to be assessed to ensure that we don't miss anything.
Can I just add one element to that, Mayor Paula?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't see
there are also lots of opportunities that we are pursuing within the city that are also even further down the track, but still need our help. So there are, as Stafford's paper and information talks about, emerging areas is one part of it, but equally there are other parts of Greenfield that need our help to get across the line or are close. So there are, I think the notion that you're talking about around trying to create multiple opportunities for supply, to create competition, to give us choice, to give the market choice, to have a range of typology housing solutions and dwelling options, absolutely is part of our focus. Equally, we also need to think about making sure we've got a pipeline of future employment-related land for business, and the nature of business that we wish to attract in the city and what other land we want for that. So those are all active considerations that HUGs is balancing through.
Could I just make one more comment, Blair? Like a definition around, paying for all infrastructure could be interesting. So, are we moving into a world where, if we give them priority access to our wastewater allocation, that they are required to make a contribution to our new wastewater treatment plant, outside a DC regime. So that the type of innovative thinking we'll need to go through. And what does paying for all of the infrastructure costs mean?
I agree. I just want to make sure that was included so that we retain every opportunity to be flexible. And I presume, apropos of the conversation we had in the tea room, Blair, if we're able to secure funding, infrastructure funding or otherwise, to bring some projects further forward and then more start to come in, then we'll have to be able to be agile and flexible. That's going to be included to bring another tranche in, and because we really can just see growth forever at the moment.
I think that what HUGs is really about is about offering a view to the when and the where of growth, and as the information changes, our view to how that might unfold will change. But it's not necessarily a fundamental shift on how we see Hamilton growing. it might be a slight realignment of timing or sequencing of development. And given...
So I just want to make sure that nothing like that's precluded. That's what you're saying. It's going to be the ability to flex, the ability to bring other arrangements to the table will still be provided for. It's just the weighting and the timing that we're...
And hugs will be used to help inform the decisions made through 10-year plan, the 30-year infrastructure strategy. So it's really setting the scene for how we want these plans and policies to unfold. They will also be able to make decisions through that process. So hugs won't constrain your decision making through a 10-year plan process. It's there to help guide and calm our direction for growth, so we know where we're going, so we're confident in our direction of travel.
The other comment, Staff, you might just want to talk about the frequency of review of hugs as well, because I think that sort of speaks to me, Paula's comment.
Yeah, so further to Blair's point there, we are planning to review hugs in the first year of every LTP so that it reflects the best information available. We know there's a lot of change going on at the moment, and where this hugs lands, the next one will need to have a view to what's happening with Three Waters, success or otherwise of IAF funding, of where the Metro Spatial Plan program business case eventually lands. So there's a lot of balls in the air that we need to make sure that hugs continually reflects. So with that view, we're looking to review on a 3-yearly cycle.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paula. That's all the questions we've got. So I'll move to the recommendation. Excuse me. Have we got a mover and seconder? Oh, I'll move. Ryan second. Oh, sorry, Sarah. I'll give it next time for you. All those in favour, please raise their hands. That's unanimous, Tyler. Thanks. Councillors, we're on to the GM's report now.
For lunch
no, well, I'd like to, just about to say that, talk about that. I want to get through. That's not going to take very long because no one, except for Councillor Gallagher, has raised any points at all. So as per usual, there won't be any discussion involved in that, other than the one question that Councillor Gallagher has raised, which Blair's prepared to answer. And then we'll break, then go to lunch, come back to PX, and hopefully get that done by 2 o'clock, which is the scheduled special council meeting time. So if everyone's happy with that process, okay. But firstly, we're on to the GM's report, which is there for your information only. But there is a question in relation to the work on the Community Lands Trust.
Thank you, Chair, and I wonder whether I can possibly just speak to both the information reports, GM report and the growth programs report.
Oh, sorry.
So I will take those reports as read. The GM report obviously covers a range of updates across a number of initiatives. Councillor Gallagher just asked about when will we talk about the Community Land Trust. There is a briefing scheduled next Wednesday on that item, so that will be where that's picked up. I would also just want to, I guess, give a shout out to the fantastic work that Karen's team have done in report attachment 2 to the information reports. That's the growth programs updates. And certainly, looking at the attachments to that, they provide an update across each of the growth program areas that Karen and her team are now focusing on. It's a wonderful summary of I guess, the initiatives that have been led by her team, and give you a great appreciation, I guess, of the wider wellbeing community outcomes we're trying to drive in terms of not just building infrastructure, but building the communities, and the work that her team is doing in partnership with those key developers to navigate the various matters that are at hand. So happy to take any questions, or offline to myself or Karen on either of those reports.
There's no prepared questions, so we're all right there, but going back to Martin's one.
But certainly they are a great read, and I just want to acknowledge Karen's team for that fantastic work.
Councillors, you know that at any stage with these reports, you can get on the phone to Karen or the relevant staff if you've been dealing with that, and get some more detail, arrange meetings, things like that. That's always open in these areas. Now, the Community Lands Trust, Well, you said that, yeah. That, okay. So that's when we're going to deal with it next week, Marty.
Is the General Manager aware of the very grave concern some members have around this table with regard to the current situation with the Community Lands Trust?
Yes.
Thank you.
And that's what will be a big part of the discussion next week, I'm sure. So, councillors, it's almost 2:45. I'm proposing we come back, start right on 1:30, if that's all right. Oh, sorry, I'll move. Sorry, moving. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I have to move the receipt of both of the open reports in item 11, seconded by Sarah. Those in favour raise their hands. Against, that's carried. And I also move that we go into PX, which is seconded by Mark 2. Then those in favour, against, that's carried. Now we'll close the meeting until 1:30. 1:30, thanks.